Welcome back to Wolf Heart Tales. Before we sink our fangs into tonight's twisted tale of rejected bonds and destined crowns, hit that like button and howl your presence to the pack. Subscribe and join our growing family of Nightwalkers, because this story will shatter everything you thought you knew about weakness, power, and the thin line between exile and destiny. Now, let the moonlight guide us into the shadows. Chapter 1. The Weight of Rejection. The snow had been falling for 8 months. Not literally, of course, but Thalia felt as though winter had taken permanent residence in her chest the day Vance Ironwood looked into her eyes during the blood moon ceremony and spoke the words that shattered her world. "I reject you, Thalia Moonwhisper, as my mate and future Luna of Frostborn Pack." She could still hear the collective gasp of the assembled wolves, still feel the way her knees had buckled as the proto-bond between them snapped like a frozen branch. The blood moon had hung overhead, crimson and swollen, and Thalia had felt its judgment pressing down on her like a physical weight. Too soft, too weak, too much heart for a world that demands claws. Those were the words Vance had used, his voice carrying across the ceremonial grounds with the authority of an alpha heir. He hadn't been cruel about it. That would have been easier somehow. No, he'd been practical, almost apologetic, as though he were simply making the sensible choice for the pack's future. "You're kind, Thalia," he'd said, and somehow that word, kind, had sounded like the worst insult imaginable. But kindness won't protect Frostborn when rival packs come calling. "I need someone who can be ruthless. Someone who won't hesitate when hard choices need to be made." And because Vance was the alpha heir and she was just an omega with no family left to speak for her, no one had objected. The elders nodded sagely. The pack warriors had looked away, uncomfortable but understanding. Even her few friends had offered only pitying glances before melting back into the crowd. Thalia had stood there, feeling her proto-bond dissolve into ashes, feeling every eye on her, feeling the weight of her own inadequacy crushing her from the inside out. When Vance had turned and walked away, his new chosen mate, a fierce warrior named Callista, at his side, Thalia had known with crystal clarity that she couldn't stay. So she'd left that very night. She hadn't planned it, hadn't prepared. She'd simply walked to her small dwelling, packed the few belongings that mattered, her grandmother's journal, some clothes, a photograph of her parents, and kept walking. Through Frostborn territory, past the border markers, into the neutral wilderness that pack wolves avoided because it offered neither territory nor resources worth fighting for. She'd walked for 3 days before finding the cabin. It was ancient, half hidden by overgrown pines and wild bramble, its wood silvered with age and weather. The door hung crooked on its hinges. The windows were filmed with years of dirt. But when Thalia had pushed inside and seen the stone fireplace, the solid walls, the sense of shelter it offered, something in her chest had finally stopped screaming. This would be her refuge, her exile, her home, that had been 8 months ago. Now, as Thalia added another log to the fire and watched sparks dance up the chimney, she reflected on how thoroughly she'd adapted to solitude. She'd repaired the cabin's worst damages, learned to hunt and forage with a skill that would have surprised her former packmates, and discovered that silence could be either peaceful or deafening, depending on her mood. Tonight it was deafening. The wind had been picking up all afternoon, and when Thalia peered through her window, she saw that the clear winter sky had been replaced by roiling clouds the color of bruised flesh. Snow was beginning to fall, not the gentle drift of a normal winter evening, but thick, aggressive flakes that came at sharp angles driven by increasingly violent gusts. "Storm's coming," Thalia muttered to herself, a habit she'd developed over months of having no one else to talk to. "I should have gathered more firewood this morning." She'd been lazy, distracted by a book she'd found in the cabin's single shelf, a water-damaged romance novel that had somehow survived decades of abandonment. The story was ridiculous, full of melodrama and impossible coincidences, but it had made her feel less alone for a few hours. Now, as the wind howled with increasing fury and the temperature plummeted, Thalia cursed her distraction. She had enough wood for tonight, maybe tomorrow if she was careful, but if this storm lasted longer than that, she'd be in trouble. The blizzard hit with shocking speed. One moment, Thalia was watching heavy snowfall through her window. The next, the world outside had become a white void, visibility dropping to zero as wind shrieked around the cabin with a sound like tortured spirits. The walls shook. The fire guttered and nearly died before Thalia frantically fed it more wood. "This isn't normal," she said aloud, her voice barely audible over the storm's rage. This is something else." She was right to be afraid. Thalia might not have her grandmother's prophetic gifts, but she'd inherited enough sensitivity to recognize when nature itself was being twisted by forces beyond the mundane. This storm felt deliberate, purposeful, as though something vast and ancient had reached down from the heavens and said, "Tonight, fate moves." Thalia spent the next hour reinforcing her cabin's defenses, stuffing gaps in the walls with spare cloth, piling her meager supply of wood close to the fire, filling every container she had with fresh water from the pump outside before the storm made that impossible. By the time she finished, her fingers were numb despite her gloves, and frost had formed on her eyelashes. She huddled by the fire, wrapped in every blanket she owned, and tried not to think about how small and alone she was against the fury of this unnatural tempest. That was when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, a scratching at her door, weak and desperate, barely distinguishable from the wind, but distinct enough to make her freeze. Thalia's first instinct was to ignore it. Opening the door in these conditions would be suicidal. Whatever was out there, animal, person, or other, was probably already dead or dying. Saving it would mean risking her own life for something that might not even survive the next hour. Too soft. Too weak. Too much heart. Vance's words echoed in her mind, and Thalia felt something hot and defiant rise in her chest. The scratching came again, more urgent now. "Damn it," Thalia breathed, and before rational thought could stop her, she was moving toward the door. She cracked it open just enough to peer outside, and the wind immediately tried to rip it from her hands. Snow blasted into her face, stealing her breath. For a moment, she couldn't see anything but white chaos. Then she looked down. There was a wolf that collapsed on her doorstep. It was massive, easily the size of an alpha in shifted form, with fur that might have been beautiful under other circumstances, a mix of silver and slate gray that reminded her of storm clouds. But now the fur was matted with ice and snow, the creature's flanks barely moving with each shallow breath. And its eyes, even half-frozen, even clearly on the verge of death, those eyes were extraordinary. Silver blue, like moonlight on glacial ice, and far too intelligent for a simple wolf. They fixed on Thalia with an intensity that made her heart skip. Werewolf, her instinct screamed. Alpha. Dangerous. Every survival lesson she'd ever learned told Thalia to close the door immediately. Strange alphas were threats. Unknown wolves could be enemies. Bringing one into her small, defenseless cabin was insanity. But looking at those silver blue eyes, seeing the way this magnificent creature was literally freezing to death on her doorstep. "You're going to get me killed," Thalia told the wolf, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "You know that, right?" The wolf's ear twitched, and for a moment, Thalia could have sworn she saw understanding in those extraordinary eyes. "Come on," she said, wedging the door open wider. "Get inside before we both freeze." The wolf tried to stand, but its legs wouldn't support its weight. Hypothermia had set in too deeply, robbing it of coordination and strength. Thalia did something monumentally stupid. She stepped out into the blizzard, grabbed the wolf by its front legs, and dragged. Chapter 2. The Stranger in Her Home. It took every ounce of strength Thalia possessed and several minutes of desperate struggling, but finally, she hauled the massive wolf across her threshold and slammed the door against the storm's fury. For a long moment, she simply stood there gasping, her muscles trembling from exertion, her clothes soaked through with melted snow. The wolf lay motionless on her floor, barely breathing, its body temperature so low that Thalia could feel the cold radiating from its fur. "Okay," she said, talking to calm herself as much as anything. "Okay. Don't panic. You've got a dying alpha werewolf in your cabin, but that's fine. Perfectly normal Thursday night. The wolf's silver-blue eyes tracked her movement, still conscious despite its condition, and Thalia felt that strange intensity again, the sense that this wasn't just an animal seeking shelter. This was someone, watching her with full awareness and understanding. She pushed the unsettling thought aside and focused on practical matters. First, she needed to get the wolf dry and warm, or hypothermia would kill it within the hour. Thalia grabbed every towel and spare cloth she owned and began the laborious process of drying the creature's fur, working systematically from head to tail. The wolf didn't resist, too weak to do more than lie still, but its eyes never left her face. "I know this must be humiliating," Thalia murmured as she worked. "Big scary alpha, reduced to being toweled off by an omega. But I promise I'm not enjoying this any more than you are." That wasn't entirely true. There was something oddly intimate about tending to this creature, about feeling the powerful muscles beneath her hands, about the way it trusted her enough to remain still despite being completely vulnerable. Thalia had spent 8 months touching no one, speaking to no one, and the simple act of connection, even with a half-frozen wolf, made her chest ache with emotions she'd thought she'd buried. Once the worst of the ice and snow were cleared, Thalia wrapped the wolf in every blanket she could spare and dragged it closer to the fireplace. She built up the fire until her small cabin was almost uncomfortably warm, then settled beside the wolf to monitor its condition. The creature's breathing was slow but steady, its heart rate weak but regular. Not ideal, but not immediately fatal either. Thalia allowed herself a small exhale of relief. "You're lucky I'm an idiot who can't leave things to die," she told the wolf, checking its paws for frostbite. "Anyone with sense would have left you outside. But apparently, I didn't learn my lesson about sacrificing my own safety for others who don't appreciate it." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. 8 months should have been enough time to let go of Vance's rejection, but apparently, the wound was still fresh enough to bleed. The wolf made a soft sound, not quite a whine, but something questioning, and Thalia felt her throat tighten. "Sorry," she whispered. "You don't need to hear about my pathetic life. Let me get you some water." She coaxed the wolf into taking small sips from a bowl, relieved when it managed to drink without choking. Hydration was crucial for hypothermia recovery, and the fact that the creature could swallow was a good sign. As the night deepened and the storm continued its assault on her cabin, Thalia found herself talking to the wolf. Not just practical updates about its condition, but real conversation, the kind she hadn't had since leaving Frostborn. "I used to think rejection was the worst thing that could happen to someone," she heard herself saying around midnight, exhaustion lowering her usual guards. "Having someone look at you and decide you're not enough, it felt like dying. But you know what's worse? Realizing they weren't wrong." The wolf's ear flicked toward her voice, and its eyes opened slightly. "Vance said I was too soft, too kind, too weak to be Luna of Frostborn.
And he was right.
I am soft. I am kind. I am the kind of idiot who drags a strange alpha into her cabin during a blizzard instead of leaving it to die like a smart person would." Thalia reached out without thinking, her fingers sliding into the wolf's fur. It was dry now, warm from the fire, impossibly soft beneath her touch. "My grandmother used to tell me that being kind was its own kind of strength," she continued, her voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "She said the world needed wolves who could be gentle, who could choose compassion even when it was hard. But Grandma died when I was 15, before she could teach me how to be strong and kind. Now I'm just lost. Too soft for pack life, too weak to protect myself, too broken to know what I'm supposed to be." The wolf shifted, moving its massive head to rest against her thigh, and Thalia felt something crack open in her chest. This creature, this stranger who should have been a threat, was offering her comfort. More comfort than any wolf had offered in 8 months. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Thank you," she breathed, continuing to stroke the wolf's fur. "Even if you don't understand what I'm saying, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making me feel a little less alone." The confession hung in the air between them, and Thalia suddenly felt embarrassed by her own vulnerability. This was a strange wolf, probably an alpha from a rival pack. Tomorrow, when it recovered, it would leave, or worse, turn on her. She was foolish to feel any connection to it. But for tonight, with a storm raging outside and the fire crackling warmly, Thalia allowed herself to pretend that she wasn't completely alone in the world. She dozed off eventually, sitting upright with one hand still resting on the wolf's side, lulled by the warmth and the presence of another living being. When she woke to gray dawn light, the storm was still raging, and the wolf was watching her with those extraordinary silver-blue eyes. "Good morning," Thalia said, her voice rough from sleep. "How are you feeling? Can you move yet?" The wolf tested its legs experimentally, managing to shift its position but clearly still too weak to stand. Thalia checked its vital signs again and was relieved to find them significantly improved. The creature would survive. "The storm's not letting up," she observed, peering through the window at continued whiteout conditions. "Looks like you're stuck here with me for at least another day. Hope you don't mind my company." The wolf tilted its head in what could only be described as an encouraging gesture, and Thalia found herself smiling despite everything. "You're a good listener, you know that? Better than most wolves I've met." She prepared a simple breakfast for herself, then offered the wolf some dried meat from her stores. It ate carefully, with more coordination than the night before, and Thalia took that as another positive sign. As the second day wore on, Thalia continued her one-sided conversation with the wolf, surprised by how much she found herself sharing. Stories about her grandmother, memories of her parents' deaths, confessions about how lost she'd felt in Frostborn even before Vance's rejection. "I never fit in there," she admitted as afternoon shadows lengthened. Everyone else seemed to know exactly who they were supposed to be: warriors, hunters, leaders. But I was always too emotional, too focused on healing rather than fighting. My grandmother said that was my gift, that empathy was rare and valuable. But the pack just saw it as a weakness. The wolf's silver-blue eyes never left her face, and Thalia could swear there was understanding in that gaze. More than understanding, recognition, as though this creature knew exactly what she meant. "Can I tell you something really pathetic?" she asked as evening approached. "Sometimes I'm glad Vance rejected me. Not because of the pain, but because it gave me an excuse to leave. I never belonged in Frostborn, never felt at home there. If he'd accepted me, I would have spent my whole life pretending to be someone I wasn't. At least now I can be myself, even if it's alone." The wolf made a sound that was almost like agreement, and Thalia laughed. A real laugh, the first in months. "You're something special, aren't you? There's too much awareness in those eyes. You're not just any wolf. You're someone important, someone powerful. I can feel it." The creature's gaze intensified, and Thalia felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. That night, as temperatures dropped even further and the storm showed no signs of weakening, Thalia made another foolish decision. Instead of maintaining a safe distance, she curled up against the wolf's warm body, seeking comfort and shared heat. The wolf didn't object. Instead, it curved protectively around her, creating a safe cocoon against the brutal cold. "Thank you," Thalia whispered into the darkness. "For not hurting me, for keeping me warm, for letting me be myself, without judgment. It's more than I ever expected." She fell asleep feeling safer than she had in months, wrapped in warmth and the steady rhythm of the wolf's breathing. The third day dawned clear and bright, the storm finally exhausted. Chapter 3. The Silver-Blue Truth. Thalia woke slowly, consciousness returning in layers. First came awareness of warmth, of being comfortable and safe in a way she hadn't felt since leaving Frostborn. Then came the realization that she was still curled against the wolf's side, her face pressed into its fur, one arm draped across its powerful frame. And finally came the knowledge that the wolf was awake and watching the door with alert intensity. "The storm's over," Thalia said unnecessarily, sitting up and trying to ignore the sudden ache in her chest. "The wolf has recovered now, strong enough to leave." This strange interlude, these 3 days of confessions and connection, was ending. She forced herself to stand and move to the window. Outside, the world had been transformed into a landscape of impossible beauty, snow piled in pristine drifts that sparkled in the morning sun, the sky a clear, painful blue, the forest standing silent and majestic in its winter coat. It was the kind of morning that should have felt hopeful. Instead, it felt like an ending. "You can go home now," Thalia said, keeping her back to the wolf so it wouldn't see the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Back to your pack, wherever that is. You're healed enough to travel." She heard movement behind her, the wolf standing, testing its legs. It was steady now, fully recovered from its brush with death. Thalia took a deep breath and turned to face it, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Go on," she said, moving to open the door. Cold air rushed in, crisp and clean after the storm's fury. "Be safe out there." The wolf moved toward the doorway, but paused at the threshold, turning back to look at her one more time. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, woman and wolf, exile and stranger, two beings who had shared something neither fully understood. Thalia could have sworn she saw regret in those silver-blue eyes. Then the wolf stepped outside, its paws leaving deep impressions in the fresh snow as it began moving toward the tree line. Thalia watched until the creature disappeared into the forest, then closed the door and pressed her back against it, sliding down to sit on the floor as the tears finally came. She had known this would happen, had known the wolf would leave. But 3 days of having someone, something, to talk to care for, to not be completely alone with, it had reopened wounds she'd thought were healing. Reminded her of everything she was missing. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself harshly, wiping at her eyes. "It was just a wolf. A stranger you helped during a storm. You need to get over this." But the cabin felt emptier than it ever had before. The silence that had once been peaceful now felt oppressive. The solitude that had been freedom now felt like a prison. Thalia spent the rest of that day trying to return to her normal routine, cleaning, organizing, forcing herself to eat despite having no appetite. But everything felt wrong. She kept expecting to see silver-blue eyes watching her from beside the fireplace, kept finding herself starting to speak before remembering she was alone again. That night, as she tried to sleep, she found herself missing the warmth of another body beside her, the comfort of feeling less alone, even temporarily. "This is pathetic," she muttered into the darkness. 3 days and you're this attached? What's wrong with you?" But she knew what was wrong. 8 months of isolation had taken a toll she hadn't fully acknowledged. And 3 days of connection, even with a wolf who couldn't speak, had reminded her of just how deeply she craved belonging. She eventually fell into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with silver-blue eyes and the feeling of soft fur beneath her fingers. The sound of voices outside her cabin the next morning made Thalia bolt upright in confusion. Voices. Multiple voices. In the middle of nowhere, on neutral territory, where no pack ever came. Her heart pounding, Thalia moved to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. There were wolves everywhere, dozens of them, in both human and shifted forms, all wearing matching black armor or formal clothing that screamed military precision. They moved with synchronized purpose, taking up defensive positions around her clearing, their discipline and coordination marking them as elite guards. And at the center of the formation stood a man who made every hair on Thalia's body stand on end. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with a warrior's build that spoke of centuries of training. His hair was dark as midnight, his features sharp and aristocratic, his presence commanding enough to make Thalia's Omega nature want to submit immediately. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Silver-blue eyes. The exact shade of the wolf who had watched her for 3 days while she poured out her heart. "Oh no. Oh no, no, no." Thalia's hands were shaking as she moved to open her door, her mind reeling with implications. The wolf hadn't been just any alpha. It had been someone powerful enough to command this kind of guard force, important enough to travel with a small army. She stepped outside on trembling legs, and the man's gaze locked onto her with an intensity that nearly drove her to her knees. "Hello, Thalia," he said, his voice deep and carrying an authority that resonated in her bones. May I come in? She nodded mutely, stepping aside as he moved past her into the cabin. The guards remained outside, perfectly positioned and utterly silent. Thalia closed the door with shaking hands and turned to face the stranger, who was somehow not a stranger at all. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, though she thought she already knew the answer. The man's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't been so weighted with emotion. "My name is Damon Nightshade," he replied, his silver-blue eyes never leaving her face. "And I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The words hit Thalia like a physical blow. Alpha King. She had saved the Alpha King's life, had sheltered him in her cabin for 3 days, had talked to him about her deepest fears, her most painful memories, her most shameful insecurities. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought you were just a wolf caught in the storm. I never would have." "Never would have what?" Damon interrupted gently. "Been so honest? Shared so much of yourself? Show me exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching." Thalia felt heat flood her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have burdened you with all my problems. You were injured and recovering, and I just kept talking. Don't apologize." His voice was firm but kind. "Thalia, do you know what I was doing when that storm hit?" She shook her head, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "I was traveling alone in wolf form, trying to escape the pressures of leadership for a few days. I've been Alpha King for 2 centuries, and in all that time, every conversation I've had has been filtered through politics and power dynamics. No one talks to me like I'm just a person. No one shows me their real self because they're too busy calculating how to gain advantage or avoid offending me." He took a step closer, and Thalia found she couldn't back away even though every instinct screamed that she should. "And then a blizzard hit, a storm sent by the moon goddess herself, I suspect, and I nearly froze to death. Until a kind Omega dragged me into her cabin and saved my life without asking who I was or what I could offer her." "Anyone would have done the same," Thalia protested weakly.
No.
Damon's voice was absolute. "Most wolves would have left me to die rather than risk bringing a strange alpha into their home. But you didn't hesitate. You risked your safety to save a stranger." And then, his voice softened. "Then you spent 3 days talking to me like I was worth knowing rather than someone to be feared or used." His hand came up to gently touch her face, and Thalia felt an electric arc between them at the contact. "You told me things I don't think you've told anyone," Damon continued. "About your rejection, about your grandmother, about feeling lost and alone. And, Thalia, I heard all of it. Every word, every confession, every vulnerable moment. I understood everything." "Oh, goddess," Thalia breathed, humiliation flooding through her. "You heard me talking about being weak and pathetic. You heard me say—" "I heard you talking about being kind in a cruel world," Damon interrupted. "About choosing compassion over self-interest. About remaining soft-hearted despite being hurt. And, Thalia, those aren't weaknesses. Those are exactly the qualities I've been searching for my entire life." He moved closer still, until they were sharing the same breath, his silver-blue eyes burning with intensity. "When you were talking about your grandmother's teachings, about how being gentle was its own kind of strength, do you know what I was thinking?" Thalia shook her head, unable to speak. "I was thinking that I had finally found her. The one person in existence who could see past the crown to the man underneath. Who would value character over status. Who would offer kindness without expectation of reward. Who could be exactly what I needed without even trying." Chapter 4. The Fate Thread Ignites. Thalia's mind was spinning, trying to process Damon's words while her body seemed determined to betray her by leaning closer to him, drawn by something she couldn't name or resist. "I don't understand," she whispered, though part of her was beginning to, a part that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Damon's hand remained on her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so powerful. "The mate bond, Thalia. It formed during those 3 days, while you were taking care of me, talking to me, being so completely yourself that I fell in love with the person you really are rather than any mask or pretense." His other hand came up to frame her face, and Thalia felt her breath catch. "You are my true mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. And I came here today to claim you." The words should have terrified her, should have sent her running. But instead, Thalia felt something click into place deep in her chest, a sense of rightness she'd never experienced before, not even in her proto-bond with Vance. "But I'm broken," she heard herself say, voicing her deepest fear. "Vance rejected me because I wasn't good enough to be Luna of a single pack. How can I possibly be good enough to be Queen of the Northern Territories?" Damon's expression shifted into something fierce and protective. "Vance rejected you because he's a fool who couldn't recognize value when it was standing right in front of him," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "He wanted someone hard and ruthless, someone who would help him climb to power through brutality and fear. But Thalia, that's not what makes a good leader. What makes a good leader is exactly what you have: compassion, wisdom, the ability to see people for who they really are rather than what they can offer you." His thumbs brushed away tears Thalia hadn't realized were falling. "You saved my life not because you knew who I was, but because you couldn't leave a living creature to suffer. You talked to me for 3 days like I was someone worth knowing, with no agenda or manipulation. You showed me who you are at your core, and that person is exactly what I've been waiting 2 centuries to find." "What if I fail?" Thalia asked, her voice breaking. "What if I'm not strong enough for this?" "Then we'll fail together and learn from it," Damon replied without hesitation. "But Thalia, I've seen your strength. It's not the kind that comes from physical power or ruthless ambition. It's the kind that helps a stranger in a storm, that remains kind despite being hurt, that values connection over self-preservation. That is true strength, and it's exactly what our kingdom needs." Thalia searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or doubt. But all she saw was fierce honesty and something that looked dangerously like love. "I know this is overwhelming," Damon continued, his voice gentling. "I know I'm asking something enormous of you. But Thalia, I need you to understand. I didn't come here with an army to intimidate or force you. These guards are here because I'm the Alpha King and protocol demands it. But the choice is entirely yours." He took a deep breath, and Thalia saw vulnerability flash across his face. "If you tell me to leave, I will. I'll make sure you're protected and provided for, and I'll walk away even though it would destroy me. Because you spent 3 days showing me who you are, someone who values genuine connection over obligation, who needs to make your own choices, who deserves to be with someone because you want to, not because you have to." His smile was soft and full of emotion that made Thalia's heart ache. "I want you to choose me the same way you chose to save me. Not because I'm the Alpha King or because of the mate bond, but because of who we are to each other." Thalia felt something shift inside her, a weight she'd been carrying since Vance's rejection finally beginning to lift. She looked at this powerful alpha who had listened to her deepest secrets and valued them, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and found her worthy anyway. She thought about the 3 days they'd spent together, about how safe and seen she'd felt even when she thought he was just a wolf who couldn't understand her words. "I missed you," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "When you left yesterday, I felt so empty, like I'd lost something I hadn't even known I needed." "I know." Damon's voice was rough with emotion. "I felt it too, the mate bond calling us back together. But Thalia, I need to hear you say it. I need to know that you're choosing this, choosing me, of your own free will." Thalia took a shaking breath, feeling something like courage building in her chest. She thought about her grandmother's teachings, about being strong enough to choose compassion even when it was frightening, about remaining open to connection even after being hurt, about choosing love over fear. "I choose you," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Not because you're the Alpha King, though that's terrifying and overwhelming, but because you listened to me for 3 days and didn't judge me. Because you made me feel less alone than I've felt in 8 months. Because when I look at you, I see someone who might actually understand who I am." The smile that spread across Damon's face was radiant enough to light up the entire cabin. "Thank you," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. Thank you for being brave enough to choose me." When he kissed her, the mate bond flared between them with such intensity that Thalia gasped against his mouth. She felt it like a physical thing, a thread of silver-blue light connecting their souls, weaving through her chest and wrapping around her heart. This was nothing like what she'd felt with Vance. That proto-bond had been pleasant but shallow, like standing in warm sunlight. This was fire and lightning and coming alive in ways she'd never imagined possible. This was her soul recognizing its other half and singing with the rightness of it. When they finally broke apart, both glowing with the bond's energy, Damon rested his forehead against hers. "You need to know something," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was lying in my wolf form, listening to you talk about feeling worthless and broken, it took everything I had not to shift right then and tell you how wrong you were." He pulled back slightly, so he could look into her eyes. "You are not broken, Thalia. You are extraordinary. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." "I'm still scared," Thalia admitted, her hands clutching his arms as though he might disappear if she let go.
Good.
Damon's smile was gentle. "Being scared means you're being brave. And you won't be doing this alone. I'll be beside you every step of the way, and so will everyone who serves our kingdom." He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch impossibly tender. "You're not an outsider anymore, Thalia. You're home." The word home made Thalia's throat tight with emotion. She had spent 8 months telling herself that this cabin was home, that isolation was freedom. But looking at Damon, feeling the mate bond warm and constant between them, she understood that home wasn't a place. It was a person, a connection, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with location. "What happens now?" she asked, allowing herself to lean into his strength. "Now I introduce you to my guards, and we begin the journey to the Obsidian Palace," Damon replied. "It will take about a week, which will give you time to adjust and ask questions." His eyes sparkled with something that looked like mischief. "And, Thalia, I should probably tell you that for 3 days, I've been dying to have an actual conversation with you. The things you told me, the stories you shared, I want to hear more. I want to know everything about you, not just what you confessed to a wolf you thought couldn't understand." Thalia felt heat flood her cheeks. "You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never," Damon confirmed with a grin. "But only because every word you said showed me exactly why you're perfect for me. Your vulnerability, your honesty, your beautiful heart, those are the things that made me fall in love with you." He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead.
"Come.
"Let me introduce you to the Eternal Guard. They're going to be shocked, but they'll adjust. And anyone who questions your worth will answer me personally." Thalia took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and placed her hand in his. Together, they stepped outside into the bright winter morning. The guards, there had to be at least 40 of them, immediately straightened to attention, their faces carefully neutral, but their eyes sharp with curiosity. Thalia could feel their assessment, could sense their surprise at seeing their king emerge from her humble cabin holding hands with an unknown Omega. But Damon's presence beside her was steady and reassuring, his hand warm around hers. "Eternal Guard," Damon's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I present to you Thalia Moonwhisper, my true mate and your future queen of the Northern Territories." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled wolves, quickly suppressed. "Lady Thalia saved my life during the storm," Damon continued, his tone brooking no argument. "She sheltered me, cared for me, and showed me the kind of compassion and courage that exemplifies everything our kingdom should value. Any wolf who questions her worth or treats her with anything less than the respect she deserves will answer to me personally. Is that understood?" "Yes, Alpha King." The response came in perfect unison, 40 voices speaking as one. The captain of the guard, a stern-looking woman with silver streaking her dark hair, stepped forward and dropped to one knee. "Lady Thalia," she said formally, "the Eternal Guard pledges itself to your protection and service. Welcome to the Northern Territories." Thalia felt tears prick at her eyes. 8 months ago, she had been rejected and cast out, told she wasn't worthy of being Luna to a single pack. Now she was being pledged loyalty by the most elite warriors in the kingdom. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice only shaking slightly. I thank you. Damon squeezed her hand gently, pride evident in his expression. Prepare for departure, he ordered. We leave within the hour. And someone brings Lady Thalia proper traveling clothes and a warm cloak. She's been living in exile. She deserves better. The guards moved with swift efficiency, and within minutes, Thalia found herself being ushered into a small tent where two female guards helped her change into clothing finer than anything she'd owned even in Frostborn. The cloak was lined with fur, the boots were supple leather, and when she caught her reflection in a polished shield, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone important, someone valued, someone who might actually deserve to stand beside a king. When she emerged, Damon was waiting, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Beautiful, he murmured, offering his arm. Though you were beautiful before, too. In your simple clothes, with snow in your hair, dragging a frozen wolf into your cabin. Thalia laughed despite her nerves. I must have looked ridiculous. You looked brave, Damon corrected. And kind. And exactly like the person I'd been searching for without knowing it. As they prepared to leave, Thalia took one last look at her cabin, the refuge that had sheltered her through 8 months of exile and 3 days of unexpected destiny. Any regrets? Damon asked softly. None, Thalia replied honestly. That storm, finding you those 3 days, it led me exactly where I needed to be. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways, Damon agreed. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives happen when we're just trying to help, without thinking about consequences or rewards. He guided her toward a magnificent black horse, then surprised her by lifting her effortlessly into the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms came around her, steady and protective, and Thalia allowed herself to lean back against his chest. As they rode away from the cabin, surrounded by the eternal guard but focused only on each other, Thalia thought about how much her life had changed in less than a week. From alone and rejected to mated and valued. From exile to queen. All because she had been kind enough to drag a freezing wolf into her cabin during a blizzard. She had sheltered a stranger and found her destiny. She had talked to a wolf and discovered her mate. She had been herself, completely and vulnerably, and been chosen because of it rather than despite it. The rejected Omega, who everyone said was too soft, had become the most valued person in the kingdom. And it all started because she couldn't leave a living creature to freeze, even when common sense said she should. Damon's lips brushed her ear as they rode. What are you thinking? That my grandmother was right, Thalia replied, feeling peace settle over her for the first time in months. Being soft-hearted isn't a weakness. It's strength. The kind of strength that changes everything. It changed my life, Damon said quietly. In 3 days, you showed me what I'd been missing for 2 centuries. And I will spend the rest of my life grateful that the moon goddess sent that storm, that you were brave enough to open your door, and that you chose to be exactly who you are. Thalia turned her head to look at him, at this powerful alpha who had seen her at her lowest and valued her anyway. I love you, she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. I think I started falling in love with you when you were just a wolf who seemed to understand everything I said. Damon's smile was brilliant with joy. I love you too, Thalia Moonwhisper. Soon to be Thalia Nightshade, Queen of the Northern Territories. My mate, my heart, my home. And as they rode toward their future together, Thalia finally understood what her grandmother had been trying to teach her all those years ago. Being kind in a cruel world wasn't a weakness. It was the bravest thing anyone could do. And sometimes, it led you exactly where you were always meant to be. Chapter 5. The Journey North. The journey to the Obsidian Palace began under a sky so clear and blue it hurt to look at. The storm that had brought Damon to Thalia's doorstep seemed like a fever dream now, impossible to believe it had been real, except for the very real Alpha King riding behind her, his arms steady around her waist as their horse picked its way through the deep snow. Thalia had never ridden double before, and certainly never with someone like Damon. Every movement brought her into contact with him, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength of his arms caging her in, the way his breath stirred her hair when he leaned forward to murmur directions to their mount. The mate bond hummed between them, a constant awareness that made her skin tingle and her heart race. "Comfortable?" Damon asked, his voice a low rumble she could feel as much as hear. "Yes," Thalia replied, though comfortable wasn't quite the right word. Overwhelmed, maybe. Hyper-aware. Confused about how her life had transformed so completely in less than 24 hours. But not uncomfortable. "We'll stop for lunch in a few hours," Damon continued. "There's a clearing about 10 miles north where we can rest the horses and eat. After that, we should reach the first way station by nightfall." "Way station?" Thalia asked. "Fortified rest stops along the major routes through the Northern Territories," Damon explained. "They're maintained by the Crown and staffed with guards. We have them positioned every day's ride apart to ensure safe travel for our people." "Our people?" Thalia felt a flutter of anxiety at the possessive. In a week, these would be her people too. She would be responsible for their safety, their prosperity, their happiness. The weight of it threatened to crush her. As though sensing her thoughts, Damon's arms tightened slightly around her. "You don't have to carry it all at once," he said quietly. "Being queen is something you'll grow into, not something you have to master in a day. I'll teach you. My advisors will teach you. And Thalia, you already have the most important quality a ruler needs." "What's that?" she asked, genuinely curious. "You care," Damon replied simply. "You care about people, about their suffering, about whether they live or die. You'd be amazed how many leaders lack that basic foundation." Thalia thought about Vance, about how he'd chosen ambition over connection, power over compassion, about how he'd rejected her because she cared too much. Vance said caring was a liability, she said before she could stop herself. She felt Damon tense behind her. "Tell me about him," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Tell me about the fool who let you go." Thalia took a breath, surprised to find that talking about Vance didn't hurt the way it used to. The wound was still there, but it had scabbed over, no longer raw and bleeding. "We grew up together in Frostborn Pack," she began. "We were friends first, good friends. He was kind to me when we were young, protective. Everyone assumed we'd end up mated, and for a long time, I thought we would too." The forest passed by on either side, silent and snow-covered. "When did things change?" Damon asked. "When we started getting older and pack politics became important," Thalia replied. Vance's father was the alpha heir, which meant Vance would eventually lead Frostborn. And the older he got, the more he changed. He became harder, more focused on strength and dominance. The kindness that drew me to him in the first place, it disappeared. She paused, gathering her thoughts. By the time the blood moon ceremony came around, the official mating ceremony for heirs, I knew something was wrong. I could feel him pulling away. But I didn't expect him to reject me publicly. In front of the entire pack. During the ceremony itself. "That's unconscionable," Damon said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Rejections are supposed to be private, handled with discretion and respect. Doing it publicly, during a sacred ceremony, that's deliberately cruel." He said he needed to make a statement, Thalia said. Show the pack that he was strong enough to make hard choices. That he wouldn't let emotion compromise his leadership. She felt Damon's breath hiss out between his teeth. "He's a fool and a coward," Damon said flatly. "And, Thalia, I want you to know something. When we perform our mating ceremony, and we will, properly, with all the sacred rites, it will be a celebration. Public if you want it, private if you prefer, but either way, it will honor you. Honor us. There will be no doubt, no shame, no cruelty. Just joy and commitment, and the recognition of what we mean to each other." Thalia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. They rode in silence for a while, and Thalia found herself relaxing into Damon's embrace, letting the steady rhythm of the horse's gait lull her into a peaceful state somewhere between waking and dreaming. Around mid-morning, one of the guards rode up beside them, a young male with sandy hair and an earnest expression. "Alpha King," he said respectfully. "Captain Morgan requests permission to scout ahead. There are reports of ice wolves in the area." "Ice wolves?" Thalia asked, alarmed. Granted, Damon replied to the guard, then turned his attention to Thalia. Ice wolves are a subspecies that lives in the deepest parts of the northern wilderness. They're larger than normal wolves, more aggressive, and they hunt in packs. Normally, they avoid traveling routes, but sometimes harsh winters drive them closer to civilization. Are they dangerous? Thalia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Very, Damon confirmed. But we have 40 of the Eternal Guard with us, and I'm not exactly helpless myself. You're safe, Thalia. I promise you that. She believed him. There was something in his voice, in the way he held her, that made her trust him completely despite having known him, really known him, for less than a day. The mate bond, she supposed. Or maybe just the fact that he'd already proven himself trustworthy in the most fundamental way possible. They stopped for lunch in the clearing Damon had mentioned, and Thalia got her first real look at the Eternal Guard as they made camp with military precision. Within minutes, they had fires going, horses tended, and a defensive perimeter established. Captain Morgan, the stern woman who had pledged loyalty earlier, approached with 2 other guards carrying food. Lady Thalia, she said formally, may I present Lieutenant Torvin and Scout Rhiannon. They'll be your personal guards during the journey. Thalia looked at the 2 wolves in surprise. Torvin was a massive male with dark skin and kind eyes. Rhiannon was smaller, with copper hair braided away from her face and the lean build of a runner. Personal guards? Thalia asked. Is that necessary? You're the future queen, Captain Morgan replied, as though that explained everything. You'll have personal guards from now on. These 2 are among my best. They'll keep you safe and help you adjust to royal life. Before Thalia could protest, Damon's hand settled on her shoulder. It's not about whether we think you need protection, he said gently. It's about the message it sends. You're valuable. You matter. And the kingdom needs to see that we treat you accordingly. Thalia nodded, still overwhelmed, but beginning to understand the politics involved. Torvin and Rhiannon bowed slightly, and Thalia noticed they both looked curious, but not hostile. That was something at least. Thank you, she said to them. I'm new to all this. I'll probably need help with more than just protection. Rhiannon's stern expression cracked into a small smile. We're here to serve, Lady Thalia. Whatever you need. Lunch was simple but filling. Dried meat, hard cheese, fresh bread that someone must have acquired that morning, and hot tea that tasted like heaven after the cold ride. Thalia ate sitting on a log next to Damon, acutely aware of the guards watching them with barely concealed interest. They're curious about you, Damon murmured, following her gaze. They've never seen me with anyone before. Never seen me look at someone the way I look at you. How do you look at me? Thalia asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Damon's smile was slow and warm. Like you're the answer to a question I've been asking for 200 years. Like your sunlight after an endless winter. Like your home. Thalia felt heat flood her cheeks, but she couldn't help smiling back. After lunch, they continued north, and Damon began teaching Thalia about the Northern Territories, its history, its geography, its people. She learned that the kingdom was divided into 12 regions, each governed by a regional alpha who reported directly to the throne. She learned about the Obsidian Palace, built on the site where the first wolves had supposedly emerged from the earth itself. She learned about ancient traditions and modern challenges, about allies and enemies, about the delicate balance of power that kept the territories stable. It was overwhelming, fascinating, terrifying. But Damon's patient explanations and the way he valued her questions, never making her feel stupid or inadequate, made it bearable. As the sun began setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose, the way station came into view. It was larger than Thalia had expected, a fortified compound with high walls, multiple buildings, and a stable that could house at least 50 horses. Guards stationed at the way station immediately recognized the royal banner and opened the gates, dropping into respectful bows as the Eternal Guard rode through. Alpha King, the station commander said, approaching quickly. We weren't expecting you. If we'd known. No formality needed, Commander Slade, Damon interrupted, dismounting and then lifting Thalia down with easy strength. "We're just passing through. We'll need rooms for the night, food for the guards, and fresh horses in the morning." "Of course, Alpha King." Immediately, Commander Slade's eyes flicked to Thalia, widening slightly as he noticed Damon's protective stance. "And for the lady?" "This is Lady Thalia Moonwhisper," Damon said, his voice carrying enough authority that every wolf in the courtyard stopped to listen. "My true mate and your future queen. She'll have the best accommodations you can provide, and she's to be treated with the same respect you'd show me." "Understood." "Yes, Alpha King." Commander Slade's bow was so deep his forehead nearly touched his knees. "Lady Thalia, welcome. It's an honor." Thalia managed a nod, her voice caught somewhere in her throat. They were shown a suite of rooms that were simple but clean, with a large bed, a fireplace, and windows that looked out over the northern forest. Torvin and Rhiannon took up positions outside the door, and suddenly Thalia found herself alone with Damon for the first time since they'd left her cabin. The awareness between them sharpened immediately. "Thalia," Damon said softly, moving toward her. "I want you to know, you don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We're mated, yes, but that doesn't mean—" "I want to," Thalia interrupted, surprising herself again. I want to be close to you. Really close. The mate bond. I can feel it pulling at me, and I—" Damon closed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands. "I feel it too," he said, his silver-blue eyes intense. "It's like fire in my blood, demanding I claim you properly. But, Thalia, we have time. We don't have to rush." "I'm not rushing," Thalia replied, her hands coming up to grip his wrists. "I'm choosing. The way you let me choose before. I'm choosing you, Damon. Choosing this. Choosing us." The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, hungrier, full of promises and need. Thalia felt the mate bond flare between them, that silver-blue thread pulling tighter, binding them more completely. When Damon lifted her and carried her to the bed, Thalia went willingly, ready to seal their bond in the most ancient and sacred way possible, ready to finally, truly come home. Chapter 6: Bonds of Silver and Soul. Morning came softly, filtering through the way station windows in pale golden streams that painted the room in gentle light. Thalia woke slowly, awareness returning in layers, the warmth of the bed, the crackling of a fire someone must have tended during the night, and the solid presence of Damon beside her. She turned her head to find him already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning," he murmured, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning," Thalia replied, her voice still rough with sleep. The mate bond between them had changed overnight. Before, it had been a thread, present but tentative. Now it was a rope, thick and unbreakable, thrumming with shared emotion and sensation. Thalia could feel Damon's contentment, his joy, his fierce protectiveness. And beneath it all, a love so profound it took her breath away. "I can feel you," she whispered in wonder. "Your emotions. You're everything." "And I can feel you," Damon replied, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Your wonder. Your lingering nervousness. Your hope." His smile was soft. "And your love. I can feel your love for me, Thalia, and it's the most beautiful thing I've experienced in 2 centuries. Thalia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Is it always like this? Is this intense?" "For true mates, yes," Damon said. "The bond will settle over time, becoming less overwhelming. But it will always be there, a constant connection between us. You'll never be alone again, Thalia. Even when we're apart, you'll feel me, and I'll feel you." The promise in those words made something in Thalia's chest unclench. After 8 months of crushing isolation, the idea of never being truly alone again felt like a miracle. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. "Alpha King," Rhiannon's voice came from outside. "Captain Morgan requests your presence when convenient. There's been a development." Damon's expression shifted immediately from tender to alert. "What kind of development?" "The Ice Wolves, Alpha King." A large pack was spotted near the northern pass. Captain Morgan wants to discuss route options. Damon sighed and pressed a kiss to Thalia's forehead. Duty calls. Will you be all right for a few minutes? Of course, Thalia replied, though she felt a flutter of anxiety at being separated from him so soon after completing their bond. As though sensing her unease through their connection, Damon cupped her face in his hands. I'll be right outside this building, he said. You'll be able to feel me through the bond. And Torvin and Rhiannon are here to help you with anything you need. Thalia nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. After Damon left, pausing to dress in his formal attire with a speed that spoke of long practice, Thalia found herself alone in the room, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Another knock came softer this time. Lady Thalia? Rhiannon's voice. May I enter? I've brought breakfast, and some things you might need. Yes, please come in, Thalia called, hastily pulling the blankets up to ensure she was decent. Rhiannon entered carrying a tray laden with food and followed by two other female wolves bearing what looked like clothing and washing supplies. We thought you might want to freshen up before we continue the journey, Rhiannon said, setting the tray on a small table. And I took the liberty of having some proper traveling clothes prepared. Your cabin attire was, well, it served its purpose, but now that you're the future queen, you'll need garments that reflect your position. Thalia felt overwhelmed by the efficiency of it all, but also touched by Rhiannon's thoughtfulness. Thank you, she said sincerely. I'm not used to being taken care of like this. Rhiannon's expression softened slightly. You're our future queen, Lady Thalia. Taking care of you is our honor, not our burden. Over the next hour, Thalia was bathed, dressed, and fed with an efficiency that would have felt invasive if not for Rhiannon's matter-of-fact kindness. The clothes were beautiful, supple leather pants, a soft wool tunic in deep forest green, and a cloak lined with white fur that felt like wearing a cloud. When she finally looked at herself in the polished metal mirror one of the wolves provided, Thalia barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked regal.
Strong.
Like someone who might actually deserve to stand beside a king. You look perfect, Rhiannon said with approval. The Alpha King won't be able to take his eyes off you. Thalia felt heat flood her cheeks and Rhiannon's stern expression cracked into something almost like amusement. The bond makes it obvious, Lady Thalia. The way he looks at you. I've served the Alpha King for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Before Thalia could respond, she felt a pull through the mate bond, Damon's attention focusing on her from wherever he was in the way station. A moment later, she heard his footsteps approaching, and then he was pushing open the door. He stopped in his tracks when he saw her, his silver-blue eyes widening. Thalia, he breathed. You look acceptable, she supplied nervously. Breathtaking, Damon corrected, crossing the room to take her hands. Like a queen. Like my queen. Through the bond, Thalia could feel his awe, his pride, his desire. It made her dizzy with pleasure. What did Captain Morgan want? She asked, trying to focus on practical matters. Damon's expression grew serious. The Ice Wolf pack is larger than expected, at least 60 individuals. They're blocking the main northern pass, which means we have two options. Take the longer eastern route that adds 3 days to our journey, or push through the pass and likely face a confrontation. What do you want to do? Thalia asked. What do we want to do? Damon corrected gently. You're my mate, Thalia. My equal. Your opinion matters. Thalia felt something warm bloom in her chest at the words. Vance had never asked her opinion on anything important, had always made decisions, and expected her to follow. What are the risks of confrontation? She asked, trying to think strategically. Ice wolves are dangerous, but we have superior numbers and training, Damon replied. The real risk is that fighting them might injure or kill wolves who are simply trying to survive a harsh winter. They're not evil, just desperate and territorial. Thalia thought about it, turning the problem over in her mind. Is there a third option? She asked. What if we tried to negotiate? Or find a way to help them so they'd let us pass peacefully? Damon's expression shifted into something that looked like admiration. What are you thinking? Ice wolves are blocking the pass because they're hungry, right? What if we left them food? Enough to sustain the pack for several weeks. We have supplies and we can get more at the next way station. But those wolves, they're just trying to survive. Thalia felt self-conscious under Damon's intense gaze. I know it's probably a stupid idea. Too soft, too impractical. It's brilliant, Damon interrupted. And exactly the kind of thinking our kingdom needs. He turned to Rhiannon, who had remained by the door. Find Captain Morgan. Tell her we're going with Lady Thalia's plan. Have the guards prepare a portion of our supplies, dried meat, grains, anything that will sustain a large pack through winter. We'll leave it at the entrance to the pass, as an offering. Yes, Alpha King, Rhiannon replied, but Thalia could see approval in the guard's eyes before she left. When they were alone again, Damon pulled Thalia into his arms. Do you know what you just did? He asked softly. Suggested something that might get us all killed? Thalia replied nervously. You found a solution that honors life instead of taking it, Damon said. You saw desperate creatures, not enemies. And you offered compassion instead of violence. That, Thalia, is what makes a great queen. What if it doesn't work? She asked. What if they attack anyway? Then we fight and we survive, Damon replied simply. But at least we tried. At least we offered the olive branch first. That matters more than you know. An hour later, they were riding north again, the entire company laden with supplies destined for the Ice Wolf pack. The guards seemed energized by the plan, and more than one gave Thalia approving glances as they rode past. Captain Morgan rode up beside Damon and Thalia, her expression thoughtful. Lady Thalia, she said formally, I've been leading the Eternal Guard for 20 years. In that time, I've seen many potential queens come and go, ambitious females seeking power, warriors seeking glory, politicians seeking advantage. But I've never seen anyone make their first decision as future queen one of compassion rather than strength. She paused, and Thalia held her breath. It's refreshing, Captain Morgan continued, and exactly what this kingdom needs. You have my full support, Lady Thalia. Whatever comes, know that the Eternal Guard stands with you. Thalia felt tears threaten at the unexpected endorsement. Thank you, Captain. That means more than you know. After Morgan rode off, Damon's arms tightened around Thalia. You're already winning them over, he murmured into her hair. And we're still 3 days from the palace. They're probably just being polite, Thalia replied. You can't feel their emotions like I can, Damon said. But trust me, they respect you. They're starting to believe in you. And by the time we reach the Obsidian Palace, they'll follow you anywhere. The northern pass came into view around midday, a narrow canyon carved between two massive cliffs, the only direct route through this part of the mountains. And blocking the entrance, exactly as reported, was the Ice Wolf pack. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, wolves the size of horses, with fur so white it seemed to glow in the winter sun. Their eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and when they fixed on the approaching company, Thalia felt a primal fear awaken in her chest. Easy, Damon murmured, feeling her tension through the bond. Stay calm. They're reading our intentions. The Eternal Guard fanned out in a defensive formation, but notably, no one drew weapons. At Damon's signal, guards rode forward bearing the supplies, which they carefully set down at the entrance to the pass before retreating. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the largest ice wolf, clearly the alpha of the pack, padded forward. It was massive, easily 9 feet from nose to tail, with scars marking its muzzle and shoulders. It sniffed at the supplies, then raised its head to look directly at Thalia. The intelligence in those pale eyes was shocking. Through the mate bond, Thalia felt Damon tense, ready to defend her if needed. But she felt something else too, a strange pull, a whisper of connection that felt oddly familiar. Without thinking, Thalia dismounted. Thalia, wait. Damon started, but she was already walking forward, her hands raised in a peaceful gesture. I know you're hungry, she called out, her voice carrying across the distance between them. I know you're protecting your pack. We don't want to fight you. We just want to pass through peacefully. Please accept our offering. Let us coexist. The Ice Wolf Alpha stared at her, and Thalia felt that pull again, stronger now, like recognition. Then, slowly, the massive creature lowered its head in what could only be interpreted as a bow. It was a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement. The rest of the Ice Wolf pack moved aside, creating a clear path through the canyon. Thalia stood frozen in shock until Damon was suddenly beside her, his hand gripping her arm firmly. "What did you just do?" he asked, awe evident in his voice. I don't know," Thalia replied honestly. "I just felt like I needed to talk to them. To ask instead of demand." "Thalia," Damon said slowly. "Ice wolves never bow to anyone. Never. They're too proud, too territorial. But that alpha just showed you deference. Showed you respect." He turned to look at her with an expression that was equal parts wonder and realization. "Your grandmother was a celestial omega, wasn't she? One of the rare wolves who could communicate with animals?" Thalia's breath caught. "She never told me directly, but there were stories. Things she could do that others couldn't." "You inherited her gift," Damon said with certainty. "That's why the Ice Wolf responded to you. That's why you could reach it when no one else could." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Do you understand what this means? Celestial omegas are born once in a generation, if that. They're considered blessed by the moon goddess herself. And you, Thalia, you're one of them." Thalia looked back at the Ice Wolf Alpha, which was now leading its pack to the supplies, and felt something shift inside her. All her life, she'd been told her empathy was weakness, that her ability to feel and understand others was a liability. But maybe, just maybe, it was actually her greatest strength. "Let's keep moving," Damon said, guiding her back to their horse. Before they changed their minds. As they rode through the pass, the ice wolves watched but didn't approach. And when Thalia looked back, she could have sworn the alpha dipped its head once more, a final acknowledgement of what had passed between them. "Welcome to queenship," Damon murmured as they emerged from the canyon. "Where your greatest weakness becomes your most powerful weapon." Thalia leaned back against his chest and smiled. Maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be after all. Chapter 7. Whispers of the Past. The encounter with the ice wolves changed something in the company. Thalia could feel it in the way the guards looked at her now, not with polite deference or curious skepticism, but with genuine respect. Even awe. By the time they stopped for their evening camp, word of what had happened had spread through the entire Eternal Guard. Thalia overheard snippets of conversation as she passed, bowed to her. Celestial Omega, blessed by the goddess herself. It was overwhelming and humbling in equal measure. "You're going to have to get used to this," Damon said that evening as they sat by the fire in their tent. The way station was still a day's ride ahead, so they'd made camp in a protected valley. Being special. Being remarkable. Being seen. "I don't feel remarkable," Thalia admitted, wrapping her hands around a cup of hot tea. I felt what the ice wolf was feeling. Desperation.
Fear.
The need to protect its pack. And I asked it to trust us. That's all." "That's not all," Damon corrected gently. "Most wolves can't feel what animals feel. Most wolves can't communicate across species barriers. What you did today, what you are, is extraordinary, Thalia. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this transition will be." Thalia was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been nagging at her all afternoon. "Did you know? When you were lying in my cabin, listening to me talk about my grandmother, did you suspect what I might be?" Damon considered the question carefully. "I suspected you had a gift," he admitted. "The way you talked about feeling others' emotions, about being too empathetic. Those are classic signs of a celestial omega. But I couldn't be certain until I saw you with the ice wolves. That kind of connection, that level of communication, it's unmistakable." He reached out to take her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Does it bother you that I didn't tell you my suspicions?" "No," Thalia said honestly. "I probably wouldn't have believed you anyway. I've spent so long thinking of my empathy as a weakness that the idea of it being a gift, it's hard to accept." "It's a gift," Damon said with absolute certainty. "And it's going to change everything about how you rule. A queen who can feel what her people feel, who can understand their needs and fears without them having to voice them. Thalia, you're going to be the kind of ruler legends are made of. The conviction in his voice made Thalia's throat tight with emotion. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. What if I fail? What if I can't live up to what everyone expects? Then you fail, and we learn from it, and we try again, Damon replied simply. But Thalia, I don't think you understand yet. You've already proven yourself in the ways that matter most. You saved a stranger's life. You chose compassion over convenience. You found a peaceful solution where others would have chosen violence. Those aren't things you can learn or fake. They're who you are at your core. He pulled her close, and Thalia allowed herself to lean into his strength. Tell me more about your grandmother, Damon said after a moment. About what she taught you before she died. Thalia settled more comfortably against him, letting the memories flow. Her name was Selene, she began. Selene Moonwhisper. She was the Omega of Frostborn Pack, but she was also more than that. People came to her for advice, for healing, for mediation when conflicts arose. She had this way of making everyone feel heard and understood. What happened to her? Damon asked gently. She died protecting me, Thalia said, the old grief still sharp after all these years. There was a rogue attack when I was 15. 3 wolves who'd been exiled from a neighboring pack for crimes they'd committed. They came to Frostborn looking for revenge, and they targeted the weakest members of the pack, the elderly, the young, the Omegas. Thalia's hands clenched into fists at the memory. Grandmother stood between them and the children they were trying to hurt. She was 60 years old, barely able to shift anymore, but she fought them anyway. She killed one, wounded another, and held them off long enough for the warriors to arrive. But she was mortally wounded, Damon finished softly. Thalia nodded. She died in my arms, telling me that being soft-hearted wasn't weakness. That the world needed wolves who chose compassion over cruelty. That my empathy would either be my downfall or my salvation, and the choice of which was mine to make. She wiped at her eyes, surprised to find tears there. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. And after she died, I tried so hard to be stronger, harder, more like the warriors everyone respected. But I couldn't change who I was. And eventually, Vance rejected me because of it. Vance is a fool, Damon said fiercely. And your grandmother was right. Your empathy is your salvation, not your downfall. It brought you to me, Thalia. It saved my life. And it's going to make you one of the greatest queens the Northern Territories has ever known. Thalia turned to look at him, seeing the absolute conviction in his silver-blue eyes. How can you be so sure? She whispered. Because I've lived for 2 centuries, Damon replied. I've seen hundreds of wolves try to lead through strength and fear. And while that kind of leadership can maintain order, it can inspire loyalty. It can't create the kind of kingdom where people thrive instead of just surviving. He cupped her face in his hands. But a leader who leads with compassion? Who makes their people feel valued and understood? Who chooses mercy when others would choose vengeance? That kind of leader changes everything. And Thalia, that's who you are. Before Thalia could respond, a commotion outside the tent made them both tense. Torvin's voice carried through the canvas. Alpha King, we have a situation. There's a wolf at the perimeter requesting an audience with Lady Thalia. Damon was on his feet instantly, and Thalia followed, her heart pounding. They emerged from the tent to find the entire camp on alert, guards in defensive positions around a figure standing just inside the firelight. Thalia's breath caught. It was Callista, the warrior female Vance had chosen over her. The one who had stood beside him during Thalia's rejection, who had become Luna of Frostborn Pack. She looked different than Thalia remembered, thinner, with shadows under her eyes and a tension in her posture that spoke of stress and exhaustion. Thalia, Callista said, her voice rough. I need to speak with you.
Please.
It's important. Damon's hand immediately went to Thalia's shoulder, protective and possessive. How did you find us? He demanded, his voice carrying the weight of an Alpha King's authority. I've been tracking you for 2 days, Callista replied, her eyes never leaving Thalia's face. Ever since word reached Frostborn that Thalia had been claimed by the Alpha King himself. I had to come. I had to warn you. Warn me. Thalia asked, finding her voice.
About what?
Callista glanced around at the assembled guards, clearly uncomfortable speaking in front of so many witnesses. It's about Vance, she said quietly. And about why he really rejected you. The words hung in the air like a physical thing, and Thalia felt the mate bond pulse with Damon's sudden alertness. Speak, Damon commanded. And be aware that if you're here to cause trouble or distress to my mate, you won't leave this camp alive. I'm not here to cause trouble, Callista said quickly. I'm here because Thalia deserves to know the truth. And because what Vance is planning could put her, and you, Alpha King, in danger. Thalia exchanged a glance with Damon, seeing her own concern reflected in his eyes. Let her speak, Thalia said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. But inside our tent, this conversation doesn't need to be public. Damon nodded, and moments later, the three of them were seated in the tent with Torvin and Rhiannon standing guard just outside. Callista looked exhausted in the better light, and Thalia felt a flicker of empathy despite everything. Tell us, Damon said, his voice hard. And start from the beginning. Callista took a shaking breath. Vance didn't reject Thalia because she was too soft, she began. He rejected her because of a prophecy. Thalia felt ice slide down her spine. What prophecy? 3 months before the Blood Moon ceremony, a seer came to Frostborn. Callista continued. An old wolf, nearly blind, but with the gift of true sight. She sought an audience with Vance's father, the Alpha, and delivered a prophecy about Thalia. Callista's hands clenched in her lap. She said that Thalia Moonwhisper would rise to power beyond anything Frostborn could offer. That she would become queen of the greatest kingdom in the north. That she would unite wolves who had been enemies for centuries and usher in an age of peace and prosperity. And Vance rejected her because of that? Thalia asked, confused. Why would he? Because the prophecy also said that the Alpha who rejected her would fall, Callista interrupted. That his pack would crumble, his legacy would be destroyed, and his name would be forgotten. But the prophecy promised that if he rejected her publicly, if he hurt her deeply enough, her power would be delayed. She would suffer first, wander in darkness, and only then rise to her destiny. Thalia felt sick. He rejected me to delay a prophecy? To try to prevent his own downfall? He thought if he could break you, make you doubt yourself enough, the prophecy might never come true, Callista said, and there were tears in her eyes now. He thought if he was cruel enough, you'd give up. Stay in exile. Never claim your destiny. That's unconscionable, Damon growled, his fury palpable through the mate bond. He deliberately hurt her, publicly humiliated her, all to try to prevent a prophecy? Yes, Callista whispered. And now that you've claimed her, now that she's on her way to becoming queen exactly, as the prophecy foretold, Vance is panicking. He's convinced that his downfall is imminent, and he's desperate to prevent it. What is he planning? Damon demanded. Callista met his eyes directly. He's gathering allies. Other alphas who fear change, who prefer the old ways of strength and violence over compassion and diplomacy. He's telling them that Thalia is dangerous, that a celestial Omega as queen will weaken the northern territories, making them vulnerable to attack. She paused, then added quietly, he's planning to challenge you, Alpha King. To try to take the throne before Thalia can be formally crowned. And he's planning to kill her if he gets the chance, because he believes that's the only way to prevent the prophecy from fully manifesting. The tent went silent except for the crackle of the small fire. Thalia felt numb, her mind struggling to process everything she'd just heard. Vance hadn't rejected her because she was truly inadequate. He'd rejected her because he was afraid of her potential, because a prophecy had promised she would rise and he would fall. Why are you telling us this? Damon asked Callista, his voice dangerously quiet. You're his mate, his Luna. Why betray him? Callista's laugh was bitter. Because he doesn't love me, she said simply. He chose me because I was everything Thalia wasn't, hard, Ruthless, ambitious. But he doesn't love me, and I'm not fool enough to think otherwise. I'm a tool to him, nothing more. A symbol of the kind of strength he values. She looked at Thalia with something that might have been regret. I stood beside him when he rejected you, and I've regretted it every day since. Not because I wanted him for myself, but because I saw what it did to you. I saw your heart break, and I said nothing. Did nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Thalia. I'm just trying to do the right thing now, even if it's far too late. Thalia studied Callista's face, using her empathic gift to sense the truth behind her words. What she felt was genuine remorse, exhaustion, and a desperate need to atone for past failures. I believe you, Thalia said quietly, and Callista's eyes widened in surprise. Thalia, Damon started, but she held up a hand. I can feel her emotions, Thalia explained. She's telling the truth. She's not here to harm us. She's here because she genuinely wants to help. Because she's carrying guilt that's eating her alive. Callista's face crumpled. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve your trust, but thank you. Damon was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. Callista, you'll remain with our company under guard. You'll tell us everything you know about Vance's plans, every ally he's contacted, every strategy he's considered, every weakness we can exploit. In return, we'll offer you sanctuary and protection from his retaliation. I accept, Callista said immediately. I'll tell you everything. After Callista was escorted out by Torvin and Rhiannon to be given food and a place to sleep under guard, Damon pulled Thalia into his arms. Are you all right? He asked softly. Thalia wasn't sure how to answer. Part of her felt vindicated. Vance had rejected her not because she was inadequate, but because he was afraid. But another part felt violated. He deliberately hurt her, publicly humiliated her, all to try to prevent a prophecy from coming true. I don't know, she admitted. It's a lot to process. We'll deal with Vance, Damon promised, his voice hard. He threatened you, which means he's threatened the crown. That's treason. And treason carries only one punishment. Death, Thalia whispered. Yes, Damon confirmed. But not until after we've used him to identify all his co-conspirators. We'll root out everyone who would threaten you, threaten us, threaten the future we're building. He tilted her face up to look at him. A prophecy said you would rise to greatness, Thalia. And I believe it. Not because some seer said so, but because I've seen who you are. You were always meant for this. And I'll be damned if I let Vance or anyone else prevent you from claiming your destiny. Thalia felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of finally understanding that her rejection hadn't been about her worth at all. I was always enough, she said wonderingly. I was always strong enough. He was just too afraid to see it. You were always enough, Damon agreed fiercely. More than enough. And soon, the entire Northern Territories will know it. That night, as Thalia lay in Damon's arms with a mate bond pulsing warm and steady between them, she thought about her grandmother's final words. Your empathy will either be your downfall or your salvation, and the choice of which is mine to make. She'd made her choice. And she chose salvation. Tomorrow, they will continue north to the Obsidian Palace. And Thalia would begin the journey from rejected exile to destined queen. But tonight, wrapped in the arms of her true mate, she was simply Thalia, soft-hearted, empathic, and finally understanding that those qualities weren't weaknesses at all. They were exactly what the world needed her to be. Chapter 8. The Obsidian Crown. The Obsidian Palace appeared on the horizon 3 days later, and Thalia's breath caught at the sight of it. It wasn't like any structure she'd ever imagined. The palace rose from the mountainside like a dark jewel, its walls carved from volcanic glass that caught the afternoon sunlight and shattered it into 1,000 prisms of color. Spires reached toward the sky like claws, and massive gates stood open in welcome, flanked by statues of wolves so lifelike Thalia half expected them to move. It's magnificent, she whispered, tightening her grip on Damon's arm as their horse carried them closer. It's home, Damon replied, and through the mate bond, Thalia felt his complex emotions, pride in his kingdom, but also the weight of responsibility that came with ruling it. Built by the first wolves 3,000 years ago on the site where they first emerged from the earth. Every stone in those walls carries ancient power, ancient magic. As they approached, Thalia could feel that power humming in the air, a resonance that made her skin tingle and her wolf stir restlessly beneath her human form. "Does it always feel like this?" she asked. "Only to those with gifts," Damon replied. "Most wolves feel nothing but awe when they look at the palace. But those with celestial abilities, with connections to the old magic, they feel the power that sleeps in these stones." The gates loomed before them, and Thalia could see figures gathering inside, hundreds of them, all dressed in formal attire, all watching as the Eternal Guard rode through with their Alpha King and his unexpected mate. "They're all here to see you," Damon murmured. "Word of your claims spread faster than we traveled. The entire court wants to meet the female who captured my heart." Thalia's anxiety spiked, and Damon immediately felt it through the bond. "Easy," he said soothingly. "You don't have to win them all over today. Just be yourself. That's all you need to be." They rode through the gates into a massive courtyard paved with smooth obsidian that reflected the sky like dark water. Wolves lined the walls, nobles in silk and velvet, warriors in polished armor, servants in simple but clean livery. All of them dropped into bows or curtsies as Damon passed. Damon dismounted with fluid grace, then reached up to lift Thalia down. She felt every eye in the courtyard tracking the movement, assessing her, judging her. "Lords and ladies of the Northern Territories," Damon's voice rang out with absolute authority. "I present to you Lady Thalia Moonwhisper, my true mate and your future queen." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a figure stepped forward from the crowd, an elderly male with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing robes that marked him as someone of high rank. "Alpha King," he said, his voice carrying despite his age. "I am Elder Finnick, head of the Royal Council. On behalf of the court, I welcome Lady Thalia to the Obsidian Palace." He turned to Thalia and bowed deeply. "My lady, it is an honor and a privilege to serve you." "The honor is mine, Elder Finnick," Thalia managed to say, grateful that her voice didn't shake too badly. One by one, members of the court came forward to introduce themselves: regional alphas, council members, high-ranking warriors, and influential nobles. Thalia tried to remember all their names and faces, but they blurred together in an overwhelming parade of bows and polite greetings. Through it all, Damon remained at her side, his presence steady and reassuring through the mate bond. Finally, when the last introduction had been made, Damon guided Thalia toward the palace entrance. "You did well," he murmured as they climbed the obsidian steps. "Better than well. You were gracious and composed." "I was terrified," Thalia admitted. "I know. I could feel it. But you didn't let it show, and that's what matters." The palace interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. Soaring ceilings carved with intricate wolf motifs, walls of polished obsidian that seemed to glow with inner light, and everywhere, tapestries, paintings, sculptures that told the story of the Northern Territory's 3,000-year history. Damon led her through winding corridors until they reached a set of massive double doors. "These are the royal quarters," he explained. "My rooms are rooms now. You'll have your own space within the suite, but—" He paused, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "I'd like it if you shared my bed, if you're comfortable with that." Thalia felt warmth bloom in her chest at his consideration. Even now, even after they'd completed the mate bond, he was giving her choices. "I'd like that too," she said softly. The smile that crossed Damon's face was brilliant with joy. The royal suite was enormous, a sitting room larger than Thalia's entire cabin had been, a bedroom with a bed that could easily sleep four, a private bathing chamber with a pool-sized tub, and what appeared to be a study lined with more books than Thalia had seen in her entire life. "This is—" Thalia turned in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. "This is too much." "This is yours," Damon corrected. "Everything in this palace, everything in this kingdom, it's yours now, Thalia. You're going to be queen." You need to start thinking of yourself as royalty. Before Thalia could respond, a knock came at the door. Damon opened it to reveal an elegant female wolf with dark hair swept into an elaborate style and wearing robes that suggested high rank. Alpha King, she said with a curtsy. I am Lady Vesper, mistress of the royal household. I've come to assist Lady Thalia with preparations for tonight's feast. Feast? Thalia asked weakly. To celebrate your claim, Damon explained. It's tradition. The entire court will attend, and you'll be formally presented as my mate. Thalia's anxiety must have shown on her face because Damon immediately pulled her close. You'll do fine, he promised. Lady Vesper will help you prepare, and I'll be beside you the entire time. You're not alone in this, Thalia. You're never alone. After Damon left, reluctantly, with multiple backward glances, Lady Vesper got to work with the efficiency of someone who had been managing royal households for decades. Thalia was bathed in water that smelled of flowers and herbs. Her hair was washed and styled into an elaborate arrangement she couldn't have replicated if she tried, and then came the dress. It was the most beautiful garment Thalia had ever seen. Deep midnight blue silk that seemed to shimmer with starlight, cut to fit her perfectly, with delicate silver embroidery along the bodice and sleeves. When Lady Vesper fastened a silver circlet in her hair, Thalia stared at her reflection in disbelief. She looked like a queen. You wear it well, my lady, Lady Vesper said with approval. The Alpha King chose wisely. Did he? Thalia asked before she could stop herself. I'm just an Omega, an exile. I have no training for this, no preparation. You have something better than training, Lady Vesper interrupted gently. You have a kind heart and genuine compassion. Do you know how rare that is in positions of power, my lady? Most rulers learn to be hard, to see their people as resources rather than individuals.
But you see people.
You feel their struggles. That's worth more than all the courtly training in the world. Thalia felt tears prick at her eyes. How do you know that about me? Word spreads quickly in the palace, Lady Vesper replied with a small smile. We've all heard about the Ice Wolves, about how you negotiated peace instead of violence, about how you spoke with them, understood them, honored their desperation instead of dismissing it. She adjusted Thalia's circlet slightly. That story has spread through the palace like wildfire, my lady. And the servants, the common folk who work here, they're already calling you the compassionate queen. They're already hoping you'll be different from the nobles who usually fill these halls. I don't want to disappoint them, Thalia whispered. Then don't, Lady Vesper said simply. Just keep being who you are. That will be enough. When Thalia emerged from the preparation chamber, Damon was waiting in formal attire that made her breath catch. He wore black leather and silk, with a circlet of silver on his own head. Not the massive crown she'd expected, but something simpler, more elegant. And the way he looked at her, Thalia, he breathed, crossing to her in 3 long strides. You're breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking. Through the mate bond, she felt his awe, his desire, his fierce pride. It steadied her more than any words could have. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. No, Thalia admitted. But I'll do it anyway. The feast was held in the Great Hall, a chamber so vast that Thalia couldn't see the far end of it. Long tables filled with food stretched in perfect rows, and hundreds of wolves in formal attire stood as Damon and Thalia entered. A herald's voice rang out. His Majesty, Alpha King Damon Nightshade, and Lady Thalia Moonwhisper, his true mate and future Queen of the Northern Territories. The assembled wolves dropped into bows and curtsies, and Thalia felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. Damon led her to the high table at the front of the hall, where seats of honor waited. As they sat, the rest of the court followed suit, and servants immediately began bringing food. The meal that followed was both wonderful and torturous. The food was exquisite, dishes Thalia had never even imagined, let alone tasted. But between every course, nobles approached to offer congratulations, to assess her, to probe gently for information about her background and intentions. Thalia answered as honestly as she could, feeling like she was walking through a minefield with every word. But Damon remained beside her, his hand occasionally finding hers under the table, his presence through the mate bond a constant reassurance. Midway through the feast, Elder Phoenix stood and called for silence. "Alpha King, Lady Thalia," he said formally. "It is tradition that during the claiming feast, the future queen demonstrates a skill or gift to the court. A way for us to understand what unique qualities she brings to the throne." Thalia felt panic spike through her. She had no skills appropriate for a royal court. She couldn't sing or dance or recite poetry. She couldn't demonstrate battle prowess or political acumen. What could she possibly? "Lady Thalia is a celestial omega," Damon said, his voice carrying through the hall. "One of the rare wolves blessed by the moon goddess with the ability to communicate across species, to feel the emotions of others, to understand and connect in ways most of us cannot." A murmur ran through the assembled wolves, surprise, interest, and in some cases, awe. "During our journey here," Damon continued, "Lady Thalia negotiated a peaceful passage through territory held by ice wolves. She spoke with their alpha, understood their desperation, and found a solution that honored both their needs and ours. She prevented bloodshed through compassion and communication." He turned to look at Thalia, his silver-blue eyes warm with pride. "That is the gift she brings to this throne. Not violence or intimidation, but understanding. Not fear or dominance, but connection. She will be a queen who feels what her people feel, who understands their struggles, who rules with her heart as well as her mind." The hall was silent for a long moment. Then slowly one wolf began to applaud. Then another, and another. Within moments, the entire great hall was filled with the sound of approval, wolves rising to their feet to honor her. Thalia felt tears slide down her cheeks as she looked out at the assembled court. These wolves, nobles and warriors and servants, were accepting her. Not because of her strength or her bloodline or her political connections, but because of who she truly was. Damon's hand found hers and squeezed gently. "You're home, Thalia," he murmured. "Finally, truly home." And looking out at the faces of her new people, feeling their genuine warmth and acceptance through her empathic gift, Thalia finally believed it. She was home. She was valued. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The rejected Omega had become the queen. And her reign, their reign, was just beginning. Later that night, after the feast had ended and they'd returned to their chambers, Damon pulled Thalia into his arms. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Overwhelmed," Thalia admitted. "Terrified. Grateful. Hopeful. All at once." "That sounds about right," Damon said with a gentle laugh. "Being royal is overwhelming. But Thalia, I saw the way they looked at you tonight. The way they responded to your story. You've already won them over, and you've only been here a day." "They don't know about Vance yet," Thalia said quietly. "About the prophecy, about his plans to challenge you. When that comes out, we'll deal with it," Damon interrupted firmly. "Together.
As mates.
As king and queen. Vance underestimated you once, and it led to his greatest mistake. He won't get the chance to make another." He cupped her face in his hands, his expression fierce. "You are going to be an extraordinary queen," Thalia moonwhisper. "And I am going to spend every day of my life grateful that a blizzard brought me to your door, that you were brave enough to save me, and that you chose to be exactly who you are." "I love you," Thalia whispered. "I love you too," Damon replied. "My mate, my queen, my salvation." And as they came together, the mate bond flaring bright and strong between them, Thalia finally understood what her grandmother had been trying to teach her all those years ago. Being soft in a hard world wasn't a weakness. It was the bravest, strongest thing anyone could be. And sometimes it changed everything. Chapter 9. The Shadows. The following morning, Thalia woke to find herself alone in the massive royal bed. For a moment, panic flared, until she felt Damon's presence through the mate bond, calm and focused somewhere else in the palace. She took a steadying breath and sat up, looking around the unfamiliar room that was now supposedly her home. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, painting the obsidian walls with golden light. It was beautiful, luxurious and utterly alien to someone who had spent 8 months living in a drafty cabin with a single room. A soft knock came at the door. "Lady Thalia?" Rhiannon's voice. "May I enter?" "Yes, please," Thalia called, grateful for the familiar presence. Rhiannon entered carrying a tray of breakfast and wearing an expression that was unusually serious. "Good morning, my lady. The Alpha King asked me to let you know he's in the war room with the Royal Council. They're discussing." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're discussing the information Callista provided about Vance Ironwood's plans." Thalia's stomach clenched. Of course. The threat couldn't be ignored just because she'd had one successful night at court. "Should I be there?" she asked. "The Alpha King said the choice is yours," Rhiannon replied. "If you wish to attend, I'm to escort you. If you'd prefer to rest and adjust to the palace, he understands." Thalia considered for a moment. Part of her wanted to hide in these chambers to avoid the political machinations and strategic discussions. But a larger part, the part that was learning to embrace her role, knew that hiding wouldn't serve anyone. "I'll attend," she said, pushing back the covers. "Give me a few minutes to dress." 20 minutes later, dressed in a simple but elegant gown that Lady Vesper had left for her, Thalia followed Rhiannon through the winding corridors of the Obsidian Palace. They descended several levels, moving from the ornate public areas into more austere sections clearly designed for function over beauty. The war room was exactly what its name suggested, a large chamber dominated by a massive table covered in maps, with weapon racks on the walls and strategic diagrams hung between them. Around the table stood Damon, Elder Finnick, Captain Morgan, and several other wolves Thalia recognized from last night's feast, regional alphas and high-ranking council members. And Callista, looking small and exhausted under the weight of so many powerful gazes. Damon's head snapped up the moment Thalia entered, and she felt his pleasure through the mate bond. "Thalia," he said, moving to her side immediately. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," Thalia replied quietly. "This concerns me as much as anyone. Maybe more." Damon's expression softened with pride, and he guided her to a seat beside his own at the head of the table. "Lady Thalia," Elder Finnick said with a respectful nod. "We were just discussing the intelligence Miss Callista has provided regarding Vance Ironwood's conspiracy." "What have you learned?" Thalia asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. Captain Morgan stepped forward, pointing to several locations marked on the map. "According to Callista, Vance has made contact with 5 regional alphas, all from territories that border Frostborn. He's been spreading propaganda about Lady Thalia, claiming that a celestial Omega as queen will weaken the northern territories, make us vulnerable to invasion from the southern kingdoms." "That's absurd," one of the regional alphas, a stern female named Astrid, interjected. "Celestial Omegas are blessed by the moon goddess herself. Having one as queen should be seen as a sign of divine favor, not weakness." "Logic doesn't matter when fear is involved," another alpha, this one a scarred male named Leaf, replied grimly. "Vance is playing on old prejudices, old fears about Omegas being too soft to lead. And in territories where strength is still valued above all else, that message resonates." Thalia felt a familiar shame trying to creep in, but she pushed it back. She wasn't too soft. She was exactly what the kingdom needed. "What's his timeline?" Damon asked, his voice cold. Callista spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "He plans to challenge you formally during the upcoming Alpha Gathering. 3 weeks from now, when all the regional alphas are assembled. He thinks if he can defeat you in single combat, he can claim the throne and eliminate Lady Thalia before the prophecy can fully manifest." The room went silent. Alpha gatherings were sacred, neutral ground where disputes were settled, alliances were forged, and leadership could be challenged according to ancient law. If Vance issued a formal challenge during the gathering, Damon would be bound by tradition to either accept or abdicate. "He's clever," Elder Finnick said grimly. "Challenging you during the gathering means he'll have witnesses from every pack in the northern territories. If you refuse, you look weak. If you accept and lose." He didn't finish the sentence. "I won't lose," Damon said flatly. Vance is a competent fighter, but he's young and inexperienced. I've been alive for 2 centuries. I've fought in more battles than he can imagine. But he won't fight fair, Callista said urgently. I know him. He'll have contingencies, tricks, ways to tip the odds in his favor. He's desperate, and desperate wolves are dangerous. Thalia studied Callista's face, using her empathic gift to feel the truth behind her words. What she sensed was genuine fear, not for herself, but for Thalia and Damon. Why are you really helping us? Thalia asked gently. You said you felt guilty, but there's something more. I can feel it. Callista's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm pregnant, she whispered, with Vance's child. And I'm terrified of what kind of father he'll be, what kind of world I'm bringing this pup into if he succeeds. The revelation sent shock waves through the room. Does Vance know? Damon asked. No, Callista said, her hand moving protectively to her still flat stomach. I only found out a few days before I left to find you. And I can't tell him. Because I know what he'll do. He'll use the child as a tool, a political pawn. He'll raise my pup to be just like him, ruthless, ambitious, willing to hurt others to gain power. She looked at Thalia with desperate eyes. I don't want that for my child. I want them to grow up in a kingdom where compassion matters, where being kind isn't seen as weakness. The kingdom you and the Alpha King are building. Please, I'll tell you everything I know, help you in any way I can. Just promise me my child will be safe. Thalia felt her heart break for this female who had stood beside Vance during her own rejection, who is now risking everything to protect an unborn pup. Your child will be safe, Thalia promised. Regardless of what happens with Vance, your pup will have a place here if you want it. I swear it. Damon's hand found hers under the table and squeezed in agreement. Callista's tears fell freely now. Thank you, she breathed. Thank you. This changes things, Captain Morgan said. If Callista is pregnant with Vance's heir, he may be even more reckless than we anticipated. He'll see this as a race against time, challenge the Alpha King before his pup is born, before he has a vulnerability that can be exploited. Then we need to be prepared, Damon said. Not just for single combat, but for treachery. For attacks that come from unexpected angles. He turned to the assembled alphas. I want security tripled for the Alpha Gathering. Every wolf who enters is to be searched for weapons, poisons, enchanted items. I want guards positioned throughout the gathering grounds, ready to intervene if Vance tries anything underhanded. And Lady Thalia? Elder Finnick asked. Callista said Vance plans to eliminate her. We need to consider her safety, specifically. I'll have the Eternal Guard around her at all times, Damon said immediately. She doesn't leave the palace without a full detail. And during the gathering itself. During the gathering, I'll be visible, Thalia interrupted. All eyes turned to her. If Vance wants to use me to create fear and doubt, then I need to show the assembled alphas exactly why they shouldn't be afraid. I need to demonstrate what a Celestial Omega can offer. Thalia, that's too dangerous, Damon protested. It's necessary, Thalia countered, surprised by her own conviction. You said it yourself last night. I won them over by being exactly who I am. I need to do that again on a larger scale. Let the alphas see me, talk to me, understand that I'm not a weakness but a strength. She looked around the table at the assembled leaders. Vance rejected me because a prophecy said I would rise to power and he would fall. He's so focused on preventing that prophecy that he can't see he's fulfilling it. Every move he makes against me, every attempt to undermine my position, just proves that he's ruled by fear. And fear makes terrible leaders. Alpha Astrid nodded slowly. The girl has a point. If we hide her away, it looks like we're ashamed of her. But if we present her proudly, if we let her demonstrate her gifts, it sends a message, Alpha Leaf finished. That we're confident, that we believe in her, that Vance's propaganda is just that, propaganda. Damon was silent for a long moment, and Thalia felt his conflict through the mate bond. He wanted to protect her, to keep her safe from any possible threat. But he also recognized the political wisdom in her suggestion. Very well, he said finally. But you'll be protected every moment. And at the first sign of real danger, you'll be evacuated. Agreed. Agreed, Thalia said. The meeting continued for another hour, with strategies discussed and refined, contingencies planned for every possible scenario. By the time it ended, Thalia's head was spinning with information about pack politics, ancient traditions, and the complex web of alliances that held the Northern Territories together. As the others filed out, Damon pulled Thalia aside. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly, putting herself in Vance's crosshairs deliberately. "I'm sure," Thalia replied. "Damon, I spent 8 months hiding from the world because I thought I was too weak to face it. I'm not going to hide anymore. Vance hurt me once, and I survived. He won't get the chance to hurt me again." Damon's expression was fierce with pride and love. "You're extraordinary," he said, pulling her close. "Absolutely extraordinary." Through the mate bond, Thalia felt his fear for her safety, but also his respect for her courage. It steadied her, reminded her that she wasn't facing this alone. "We should talk to Callista," Thalia said. "Make sure she has proper accommodations, proper care. She's carrying a pup. She needs to be treated with respect and compassion, not like a prisoner." "Already taken care of," Damon replied. "I've had her moved to guest quarters in the East Wing. Lady Vesper is seeing to her needs, and I've assigned 2 guards who specialize in protection rather than intimidation." "Thank you," Thalia said, feeling a rush of love for this male who understood her heart so well. They walked through the palace corridors together, and Thalia found herself studying the tapestries on the walls, ancient works depicting the history of the Northern Territories. One showed the first wolves emerging from the earth. Another showed the construction of the Obsidian Palace. A third showed a coronation, with the queen and king standing side by side before a cheering crowd. Soon, that would be her. Her and Damon, crowned together, ruling together. If they survived the next 3 weeks. "Damon," Thalia said quietly. "The prophecy Callista mentioned, the one about me rising to power and Vance falling. Do you think it's real?" Damon considered the question carefully. "I think prophecies are tricky things," he said finally. "They're often self-fulfilling. Vance rejecting you because he was afraid of the prophecy is exactly what set you on the path to becoming queen. But whether the prophecy itself has power, or whether it's just his fear giving it power, I don't know." He pulled her to a stop, turning to face her. "What I do know is this, prophecy or not, you deserve to be queen. Not because some seer said it would happen, but because of who you are. Because you're compassionate and strong and brave. Because you see people, really see them, in ways most rulers never can. That's why you're here, Thalia. Not because of destiny, but because of choice, yours and mine." Thalia felt tears prick at her eyes. "I hope I don't disappoint you." "Impossible," Damon said firmly. "You couldn't disappoint me if you tried." That evening, Thalia visited Callista in her new quarters. The female looked better than she had in the war room, freshly bathed, wearing clean clothes, some color returning to her cheeks. "Thank you for coming," Callista said, standing when Thalia entered. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." "You're carrying a pup," Thalia replied simply. "And you're trying to do the right thing despite it being difficult and dangerous."
Of course I want to see you."
Callista's eyes filled with tears again. "I don't deserve your kindness. I stood beside Vance when he rejected you. I said nothing, did nothing." "You're doing something now," Thalia interrupted gently. "That's what matters. You're protecting your child and trying to prevent more harm. That takes courage." She moved closer, placing a hand on Callista's arm. "I can feel your guilt, your fear, your determination. My grandmother used to say that people shouldn't be judged by their worst moments, but by what they do afterward. You made a mistake by staying silent during my rejection, but you're not staying silent now." Callista covered Thalia's hand with her own. "I'll help you in any way I can. I'll tell you everything about Vance's plans, his allies, his weaknesses. Whatever you need." "What I need," Thalia said, "is for you to take care of yourself and your pup. Let us worry about Vance. You focus on staying healthy and safe." "Thank you," Callista whispered. For seeing me as more than just Vance's mate. For treating me like a person instead of a political pawn. That's what I do, Thalia replied with a small smile. I see people. It's apparently my gift. After leaving Callista, Thalia found herself drawn to the palace gardens, a vast space enclosed by walls but open to the sky, filled with plants that somehow thrived despite the northern cold. She walked among them, feeling their life force, their quiet resilience. They're beautiful, aren't they? A voice said from behind her. Thalia turned to find Elder Finnick approaching, his movements slow but steady. They are, she agreed. How do they survive in this climate? Magic, Finnick replied simply. Ancient magic woven into the very soil of these gardens. The first wolves wanted to ensure that life could flourish even in harsh conditions, a reminder that strength isn't just about surviving, but about thriving. He moved to stand beside her, looking out over the gardens. You remind me of these plants, Lady Thalia. Soft and gentle on the surface, but with roots that run deep and strong. The kind of strength that endures when brute force fails. I hope you're right, Thalia said quietly. Everyone keeps telling me I'm strong, but I still feel like that rejected Omega hiding in a cabin. Feelings lie, Finnick said wisely. They're real, but they're not always true. You feel weak because you've been told you're weak your entire life. But the evidence suggests otherwise. You saved the Alpha King's life. You negotiated with ice wolves. You stood before the entire court last night and won them over with nothing but honesty and compassion. He turned to look at her, his aged eyes sharp with intelligence. Vance Ironwood fears you, Lady Thalia. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong in ways he can't understand or control. That's why he rejected you. That's why he's trying to destroy you now. Because deep down, he knows that everything the prophecy promised is true. You will rise and he will fall. What if I'm not ready? Thalia asked. What if I fail? Then you fail, and you learn and you try again, Finnick replied. That's what leadership is, not being perfect, but being willing to keep trying even when you're afraid. Even when you fail. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The Alpha King chose well when he chose you. And the kingdom will be better for having you as queen. Trust in that, Lady Thalia. Trust in yourself. As Finnick walked away, leaving her alone among the thriving gardens, Thalia felt something shift inside her. A settling, a quiet acceptance of who she was and what she was meant to become. She was Thalia Moonwhisper, a rejected Omega turned future queen. She was soft-hearted and empathic, compassionate and kind. And those qualities weren't weaknesses. They were exactly what would help her and the kingdom survive what was coming. 3 weeks until the Alpha Gathering. 3 weeks to prepare for the confrontation that would determine everything. Thalia took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked back toward the palace. She had work to do. Chapter 10. The Weight of a Crown. The 3 weeks before the Alpha Gathering passed in a blur of preparation, training, and political maneuvering that left Thalia exhausted each night and anxious each morning. But through it all, Damon remained her constant, steady, supportive, and utterly convinced of her ability to face what was coming. Again, Captain Morgan said, circling Thalia in the palace training grounds. Show me the defensive stance. Thalia adjusted her footing, raising her hands in the position she'd been taught. It had been Damon's idea that she learn at least basic self-defense, not because he expected her to fight, but because knowing how to protect herself would give her confidence. Better, Morgan acknowledged. Your balance has improved. Now, if someone grabs you from behind. The captain demonstrated, moving behind Thalia and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Thalia executed the escape technique they'd practiced, twisting and ducking under Morgan's arm. Excellent, Morgan said with approval. You're a natural, Lady Thalia. Your empathic abilities let you anticipate movement in ways most fighters can't. I can feel when you're about to move, Thalia admitted. Your intention shifts a split second before your body does. It's like reading emotion but faster. That's a significant advantage, Morgan replied. And one that will serve you well if anyone tries to attack you during the gathering. The thought sent a chill down Thalia's spine, but she pushed it aside. Fear wouldn't help her. Preparation would. After training, Thalia spent hours with Elder Finnick and the Royal Council, learning the intricacies of pack politics and territorial law. She studied maps until she could recite the names and locations of all 12 regions. She memorized the faces and histories of every regional alpha who would attend the gathering. She learned about trade agreements, border disputes, and the complex web of alliances that held the northern territories together. It was overwhelming, but also fascinating. Thalia had never imagined she'd need to understand economics or military strategy, but now both felt essential. "You're doing remarkably well," Elder Finnick told her one afternoon as they reviewed documentation about historical alpha gatherings. "Most wolves in your position would still be struggling with basic protocol. But you've absorbed everything we've taught you and applied it with wisdom beyond your years." "I'm terrified I'll forget something crucial at the wrong moment," Thalia admitted. "You won't," Finnick assured her. "Because you're not just memorizing facts, you're understanding the people behind them. That's what will make you a great queen, Lady Thalia. Not your knowledge, but your empathy." In the evenings, Thalia often found herself in the gardens, seeking peace among the magically sustained plants. It was there that she received unexpected visitors, common wolves from the palace staff who had heard about the compassionate queen and wanted to meet her. A young servant named Kala approached one evening, nervously twisting her apron. "Lady Thalia? I'm sorry to disturb you, but may I speak with you?" "Of course," Thalia replied warmly. "Please sit." Kala perched on the edge of the garden bench, her anxiety palpable through Thalia's empathic sense. "I heard what you did with the ice wolves," Kala said quietly. "How you talked to them, understood them, and found a peaceful solution. And I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Thalia asked, confused. "Why?" "Because my brother is in the Eternal Guard," Kala explained. "If you had negotiated with the ice wolves, there would have been a battle. Wolves would have died. Maybe my brother among them. You saved lives, Lady Thalia. You saved him." Tears glistened in the young wolf's eyes. "Most nobles wouldn't have cared about guard lives. They would have seen us as expendable. But you valued life over convenience. You chose compassion over violence. That means everything to those of us who serve." Thalia felt her own throat tighten with emotion. "Your brother's life matters. Every life matters. That's not something special. That's just basic decency." "It's special to us," Kala replied softly. "And we're all praying that you become our queen. That you and the Alpha King will build the kind of kingdom where wolves like my brother, common wolves, not nobles, are valued and protected." After Kala left, Thalia sat in the garden for a long time, thinking about the weight of the crown she would soon wear. It wasn't just about politics and power. It was about real wolves with real lives, depending on her to make decisions that honored their worth. The responsibility was staggering. But for the first time, Thalia didn't feel crushed by it. She felt ready. 10 days before the gathering, Damon took Thalia to a private chamber deep in the palace, a room she'd never seen before, carved entirely from obsidian and glowing with soft silver light that seemed to come from the stone itself. "This is the chamber of the first wolves," Damon explained, his voice reverent, "where every Alpha King and Queen has come before their coronation to commune with the ancient spirits." In the center of the room stood 2 pedestals, each holding a circlet, one larger and more masculine, one smaller and more delicate. But both were crafted from the same silvery metal that seemed to pulse with inner light. The original crowns, Thalia breathed, made by the first wolves themselves. 3,000 years old and still as powerful as the day they were forged, Damon confirmed. "After the gathering, after we've dealt with Vance's challenge, we'll return here for our formal coronation. You'll wear that crown, Thalia. You'll become queen not just in name, but in truth." Thalia approached the smaller crown slowly, feeling the power radiating from it. When she reached out tentatively, the metal seemed to warm beneath her fingers. "It recognizes you," Damon said with wonder. "The crown recognizes your right to wear it. Do you feel it?" Thalia did feel it, a tingling sensation that traveled up her arm and settled in her chest, warm and accepting. The crown wasn't rejecting her. It was welcoming her. The first wolves were celestial beings, Damon explained. They had gifts like yours: empathy, communication with animals, the ability to feel the emotions of others. That's why the crown responds to you. You're one of their true descendants, Thalia. Not by blood, but by spirit. Thalia felt tears slip down her cheeks. All her life, she'd felt like she didn't belong anywhere. But standing here, feeling the ancient crown's acceptance, she finally understood that she'd always belonged here. In this palace, beside this male, serving these people. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Scared of failing them. Scared of not being enough. Damon moved to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist as he pulled her back against his chest. Every ruler feels that fear, he murmured into her hair. I felt it when I was crowned 200 years ago. I still feel it some days. But Thalia, that fear is what makes you good. Leaders who aren't afraid of failing their people are the ones who do fail. Because they stop trying to be better. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You care too much to fail. That's your strength. Remember that when Vance tries to make you doubt yourself. 5 days before the gathering, Callista went into early labor. Thalia was in a council meeting when word came, and she immediately excused herself to rush to the guest quarters where Callista had been staying. Lady Vesper was already there, along with the palace healers, and the room was thick with tension. The pup is coming early, one of the healers, an elderly female named Bronwyn, said grimly. Too early. We're doing everything we can, but... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Thalia could feel the healer's worry, could sense the precariousness of the situation. Callista lay on the bed, her face pale and twisted with pain, her hand clutching at the sheets. Thalia, she gasped when she saw her. The baby, please, you have to save my baby. We're doing everything we can, Thalia promised, moving to Callista's side and taking her hand. Through their contact, she felt Callista's terror, her desperate love for the pup she hadn't even met yet, her regret for all the choices that had led her here. And beneath it all, Thalia felt something else, a tiny, flickering presence. The pup's life force, weak but fighting. Without thinking, Thalia placed her other hand on Callista's swollen belly and reached out with her empathic gift. She'd never tried to communicate with an unborn pup before, but the instinct felt right, natural. Hold on, she thought, projecting calm and reassurance toward that tiny presence. Hold on just a little longer. We're here. You're safe. Hold on. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then Callista cried out, and the healers moved with swift efficiency, and suddenly there was a new sound filling the chamber, the thin, reedy wail of a newborn pup. It's a girl, Healer Bronwyn announced, her voice thick with emotion. Small but breathing. Strong lungs on this one. Callista sobbed with relief as the healers cleaned the pup and wrapped her in soft cloth. When they placed the tiny bundle in Callista's arms, Thalia felt such a surge of love through her empathic connection that it nearly drove her to her knees. She's perfect, Callista whispered, staring down at her daughter with wonder. She's absolutely perfect. The pup had stopped crying, her tiny face scrunched up as she tried to focus on her mother's face. She was impossibly small, with a tuft of dark hair and fingers that wrapped instinctively around Callista's thumb. Thank you, Callista said, looking up at Thalia with tears streaming down her face. I felt you. When I thought I was losing her, I felt you reach out, felt you help her hold on. You saved her, Thalia. You saved my daughter. Thalia felt her own tears falling. What will you name her? Callista looked down at her daughter, then back up at Thalia. Sage, she said softly. After my grandmother. And after the wisdom to know when to choose the right path, even when it's difficult. It's a beautiful name, Thalia said. Over the next few hours, as Callista rested and little Sage slept, Thalia found herself unable to leave. She sat beside the bed, watching this new life that had entered the world against all odds, and felt something settle deeper inside her. This was what she was fighting for. Not power or prestige, but moments like this. Mothers holding their pups safely. Families protected. Lives valued and honored. When Damon found her hours later, still sitting vigil beside Callista and Sage, his expression softened with understanding. "Come," he said gently. "Let them rest. You need rest too." "She almost died," Thalia said quietly as they walked back to their chambers. Both of them almost died. And all I could think was, what if Vance succeeds? What if he takes the throne and builds a kingdom where wolves like Callista and Sage don't matter? Where only the strong survive and everyone else is expendable? "That's not going to happen," Damon said firmly. "Because we're going to stop him. Together." That night, wrapped in Damon's arms, Thalia felt the mate bond pulse between them, steady, strong, unbreakable. 3 days, she murmured. 3 days until the gathering. 3 days until we show every alpha in the Northern Territories exactly what kind of queen you're going to be, Damon replied. 3 days until we put an end to Vance's schemes once and for all. And if something goes wrong? Thalia asked. If he somehow wins? He won't, Damon said with absolute certainty. But Thalia, even if the impossible happened, even if everything fell apart, you would still be my mate. My love. My heart. Nothing Vance does can change that. Nothing can break what we have. Thalia turned in his arms to look at him, seeing the fierce love in his silver blue eyes. I love you, she said. Whatever happens at the gathering, I need you to know that. I love you more than I ever thought possible. I love you too, Damon replied, pulling her close. My brave, compassionate, extraordinary mate. My queen in every way that matters. They made love that night with a desperate intensity, as though trying to seal their bond even more completely before facing what was to come. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together, the mate bond glowed between them like a shield against the darkness. 2 days before the gathering, the visiting alphas began arriving. Thalia stood beside Damon in the great courtyard, formally greeting each regional leader as they entered. She'd memorized their faces and histories, but meeting them in person was different, feeling their curiosity, their assessment, their judgment through her empathic gift. Alpha Astrid arrived first, the stern female from the Eastern Territories who had spoken in Thalia's defense during the War Council. She bowed to Damon, then surprised everyone by bowing equally deeply to Thalia. Lady Thalia, she said, I've heard remarkable things about you. I look forward to seeing you lead beside our Alpha King. The honor is mine, Alpha Astrid, Thalia replied, feeling genuine warmth from the female. Alpha Leaf came next, the scarred warrior from the western regions. He assessed Thalia with sharp eyes before nodding slowly. You have kind eyes, he said gruffly. But I see steel in them too. Good. Kindness without strength is useless. But strength without kindness is cruelty. You might just have the balance we need. One by one, the regional alphas arrived and were greeted. Most were cautiously respectful. A few were openly curious. And a handful, the ones Callista had identified as Vance's potential allies, were coldly polite, their disapproval palpable. And finally, as the sun began to set on the second-to-last day before the gathering, Vance Ironwood arrived. He looked different than Thalia remembered, harder, with shadows under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that spoke of stress and desperation. When his gaze landed on her, standing beside Damon in a position of honor, she saw pure hatred flash across his face before he masked it with cold politeness. Alpha King, Vance said, bowing stiffly. Thank you for your hospitality. Alpha Vance, Damon replied, his voice neutral but his hand tightening possessively on Thalia's waist. Welcome to the Obsidian Palace. I trust your journey was uneventful. Quite, Vance replied. Then his gaze slid to Thalia. And this must be Lady Thalia. How interesting to see you again. The venom beneath his polite words was unmistakable, and Thalia felt Damon tense beside her. But Thalia met Vance's gaze steadily, refusing to let him see any fear or doubt. Alpha Vance, she said calmly. I hope you'll enjoy your stay. The gathering promises to be memorable. The threat in her words was subtle but clear, and Vance's jaw tightened. "I'm certain it will be," he replied coldly. As Vance moved past them toward the guest quarters, Thalia felt a chill run down her spine. Tomorrow, everything will come to a head. Tomorrow, they would face Vance's challenge and whatever treachery he had planned. Tomorrow would determine the future of the Northern Territories. And Thalia could only hope she was ready. Chapter 11. The Alpha Gathering. The morning of the Alpha Gathering dawned cold and clear, with frost painting intricate patterns across the windows of the royal chambers. Thalia woke before sunrise, unable to sleep, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong in the hours ahead. Beside her, Damon stirred, immediately sensing her wakefulness through the mate bond. "Can't sleep?" he murmured, pulling her closer. "Too many thoughts," Thalia admitted, settling against his chest and listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "What if?" "No," Damon interrupted gently. "No, what if's today? Today, we trust in our preparation and our bond, and in the strength we have together. Whatever Vance tries, we'll face it. Together." Thalia tilted her head to look at him, seeing fierce determination in his silver-blue eyes even in the pre-dawn darkness. "I'm not afraid of him," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I'm afraid of letting everyone down. All those wolves who are counting on us to build something better." "You won't let them down," Damon said with absolute certainty. "I've watched you these past weeks, Thalia. You've transformed from a rejected Omega hiding in the wilderness into a queen who commands respect through compassion and wisdom. You're ready for this. More ready than you know." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Besides, you have something Vance doesn't understand and can never possess. You have genuine love and loyalty from those around you. His allies follow him out of fear or ambition. Yours follow you because they believe in you. That makes all the difference." As dawn broke, Lady Vesper arrived with an entourage of attendants to help Thalia prepare. The gown they'd chosen for today was significant, deep midnight blue like the one from the welcoming feast, but this one was more elaborate, with silver embroidery depicting wolves running through starlight and a train that flowed behind her like water. "You look like a queen," Lady Vesper said with approval as she fastened the final clasps. "Like someone born to rule." Thalia studied her reflection in the mirror. The female staring back at her looked regal, powerful, and utterly unlike the frightened exile who had dragged a frozen wolf into her cabin just weeks ago. But the eyes were the same kind, empathic seeing. "Remember who you are," Thalia whispered to her reflection. "Remember why you're here." The Alpha Gathering was held in the Great Arena, an ancient amphitheater carved into the mountainside behind the Obsidian Palace. Thalia had seen it from a distance during her time here, but approaching it now, surrounded by the Eternal Guard, she felt the weight of its history pressing down on her. Thousands of wolves could gather here, and today, it seemed all of them had come. The arena was packed with representatives from every pack in the Northern Territories, alphas, betas, warriors, advisors, all dressed in their formal finest, all watching with sharp attention as Damon and Thalia made their entrance. A herald's voice rang out. His Majesty, Alpha King Damon Nightshade, and Lady Thalia Moonwhisper. The assembled wolves rose in a wave, bowing and curtsying as Thalia and Damon walked down the central aisle toward the raised platform at the arena's heart. Thalia kept her head high, her hand steady in Damon's grip, refusing to show the nervousness churning in her stomach. They took their seats on twin thrones carved from obsidian, and the gathering officially began. Elder Finnick stepped forward as master of ceremonies, his aged voice somehow carrying to every corner of the vast space. "Wolves of the Northern Territories," he announced. "We gather today, as our ancestors have gathered for 3,000 years, to conduct the sacred business of our kingdom, to settle disputes, forge alliances, and ensure the continued prosperity of all our packs." The traditional opening rituals followed, statements from regional alphas about their territory status, reports on trade and resources, discussions of border disputes and hunting rights. Thalia listened intently, using her empathic gift to read the undercurrents beneath the formal words, sensing alliances and tensions that weren't openly spoken. She also felt Vance's presence like a cold spot in the crowd, his hatred and desperation radiating toward her despite the physical distance between them. Several hours into the gathering, during a brief recess, Captain Morgan approached the throne platform with a grim expression. "Alpha King, we've found something," she said quietly, her voice pitched for Damon's ears only. Guards searching Vance's quarters discovered these. She held out a small leather pouch. Inside were vials of dark liquid that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Poison?" Damon asked, his voice hardening. "Worse," Morgan replied. "Nightshade extract, mixed with wolfsbane and something else our healers haven't identified yet. A single drop would be lethal to any wolf, even an alpha. And he had enough here to kill a dozen." Thalia felt ice slide down her spine. "He was going to use it on you during the challenge." "Most likely," Morgan confirmed. "Coat a blade, poison a drink, create an accident during combat. We've confiscated all of it, and we're searching every member of Vance's party for additional weapons or poisons." "Good work, Captain," Damon said. "But say nothing yet. Let Vance think his plan is still intact. When he makes his move, we'll be ready." As the gathering resumed, Thalia noticed Vance becoming increasingly agitated. He kept glancing toward his allies, toward the exits, his earlier cold composure cracking as the afternoon wore on. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Vance stood. "Alpha King," he called out, his voice cutting through the current discussion. "I invoke the right of challenge." The arena went silent. Every wolf present knew what those words meant, an ancient right that allowed any alpha to challenge the ruling monarch for the throne through single combat. "On what grounds?" Elder Finnick asked, his voice formal despite the tension crackling through the air. "On the grounds that Alpha King Damon Nightshade has made a choice that endangers our entire kingdom," Vance declared, his voice rising to carry to every corner of the arena. "He has chosen as his mate and future Queen in Omega, a wolf too weak, too soft, too emotionally compromised to lead. He has let sentiment cloud his judgment, and in doing so, he threatens the strength and security of the Northern Territories." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeing, others clearly skeptical. "Lady Thalia may be certain gifts," Vance continued, his tone making the words sound like an insult. "But gifts without strength are useless. A celestial Omega as queen will make us vulnerable to our enemies, will weaken our warrior culture, and will transform us from a kingdom of strength into a kingdom of kindness." He spat the last word as though it were poison. "I challenge you, Alpha King, for the right to rule. And when I win, I will choose a mate worthy of standing beside a true alpha, a warrior, not a whimpering Omega who communicates with animals." The insults hit their mark, and Thalia felt rage surge through the mate bond from Damon. But when she glanced at him, his face was perfectly controlled, showing nothing but cold calculation. "Your challenge is noted, Alpha Vance," Damon said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "And according to ancient law, I am bound to accept or abdicate. But before we proceed, I have some questions." He stood, moving to the edge of the platform, his presence commanding every eye. "You claim Lady Thalia is too weak to be queen. Yet she negotiated peaceful passage through Ice Wolf territory when any other solution would have resulted in bloodshed. She saved lives through diplomacy and compassion. Is that weakness? Or is that strength?" "It's luck," Vance shot back. "A trick that won't work twice. Real leadership requires the willingness to use force, to make hard choices, to sacrifice the few for the many. She's incapable of that." "And you're capable of it?" Damon asked, his voice deceptively mild. "You're capable of sacrificing others for your own gain?" "If necessary, yes," Vance replied. "That's what real alphas do." "Interesting," Damon said. "Then perhaps you can explain these." He gestured, and Captain Morgan stepped forward, holding the pouch of poison vials high for all to see. "These were found in your quarters, Alpha Vance. Nightshade extract mixed with wolfsbane and other lethal compounds. Enough poison to kill a dozen wolves. Were you planning to sacrifice me for your own gain? Is that the kind of hard choice you meant?" The arena erupted in shocked exclamations. Vance's face went white, then red with fury. "Those were planted," he shouted. "This is a setup, a political trick to discredit me before the challenge." "We have witnesses," Morgan interrupted coldly. "3 guards who watched you hide these vials in your quarters. Guards who were loyal to you until they realized you planned to violate sacred combat laws by using poison during the challenge." She turned to address the assembled wolves. Alpha Vance planned to cheat, to use forbidden weapons and poisons during what should have been honorable single combat. He speaks of strength and honor, but his actions show only cowardice and treachery. "Lies!" Vance roared, but his desperation was palpable now. He looked around wildly at his supposed allies, but none of them met his eyes. They were already distancing themselves from his failing conspiracy. "Do you deny planning to challenge me today?" Damon asked calmly. "No, but do you deny that these poisons were found in your quarters?" "They were planted, I tell you." "Do you deny," Damon's voice grew harder, "that you rejected Lady Thalia publicly and cruelly during a blood moon ceremony because a prophecy told you she would rise to power while you fell?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Vance's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The truth was written across his face for everyone to see. "A witness has come forward," Damon continued, "who confirms that you rejected your true mate not because she was inadequate, but because you were afraid of her potential. Afraid that a prophecy would come true. Afraid that your own inadequacy would be exposed." He took a step forward, and his power rolled across the arena like a physical wave. "You speak of strength, Alpha Vance, but you're ruled by fear. Fear of prophecy, fear of change, fear of a female who threatened your fragile ego. You hurt an innocent wolf, publicly humiliated her, because you were too weak to face your own inadequacy." Damon's silver-blue eyes blazed with fury. "That is not strength. That is the worst kind of cowardice. And it has no place in my kingdom." The arena was silent except for the wind whistling through the ancient stones. "So yes," Damon said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "I accept your challenge, Alpha Vance. But know this, when I defeat you, it won't be for your insults against me. It will be for what you did to Thalia. For the pain you caused an innocent wolf out of nothing but fear and selfishness." He turned to Elder Finnick. "Prepare the combat circle. Let's end this now." The next 30 minutes were a blur of preparation. The crowd shifted to form a massive circle in the arena's center, guards marking the boundaries with torches. Damon removed his formal robes, standing bare-chested in leather combat pants, every inch the warrior king despite his 2 centuries of age. Vance stood opposite him, younger and perhaps more desperate, but Thalia could feel his confidence crumbling through her empathic gift. He'd expected to face Damon with poison weapons, with tricks and treachery to tip the odds in his favor. Now, stripped of his schemes, he would have to fight honestly, and he knew he would lose. Thalia stood at the edge of the circle with Captain Morgan and the Eternal Guard, her heart pounding but her faith in Damon absolute. "Begin." Elder Finnick's voice rang out. The 2 alphas circled each other, Damon moving with fluid grace, while Vance's movements were jerky with tension. Vance struck first, a wild, powerful blow that Damon sidestepped easily. The Alpha King moved like water, avoiding strikes that would have felled a lesser wolf, his own counters precise and devastating. Within minutes, it was clear to everyone watching that this wasn't a fight. It was a lesson, Damon demonstrating the difference between true strength and desperate ambition. Finally, after Vance had exhausted himself with increasingly wild attacks, Damon struck. A single, perfectly placed blow that sent Vance crashing to the ground, gasping for breath. Damon stood over him, not even breathing hard. "Yield," he commanded. "Never," Vance spat, trying to rise. "I'll never." Damon's foot came down on Vance's chest, pinning him. "You've already lost, Vance. Lost your challenge, lost your schemes, lost any shred of honor you might have once possessed. Yield, and I'll show you the mercy you never showed Thalia. Refuse, and I'll end this permanently." Vance looked up at Damon, then past him to where Thalia stood watching. For a moment, she saw something that might have been regret flash across his face. "I yield," he whispered. Damon stepped back, and guards immediately moved forward to take Vance into custody. Alpha Vance Ironwood, Elder Finnick declared formally. "You are found guilty of conspiracy, attempted murder, and violation of sacred challenge laws. You are hereby stripped of your title and exiled from the Northern Territories. You will be escorted beyond our borders and forbidden from ever returning, in pain of death." Vance's face crumpled as the full weight of his failure crashed down on him. Everything he'd feared from the prophecy had come true, not because of Thalia's rise, but because of his own actions against her. As guards dragged him away, Thalia felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, yes, but also sadness. This male had been her friend once, before fear twisted him into someone unrecognizable. Damon returned to her side, and the crowd erupted in cheers. "It's over," he said, pulling her close. "It's finally over." But Thalia shook her head slightly, a small smile playing at her lips. "No," she replied. "It's not over. It's just beginning." She stepped forward, moving to the center of the combat circle, and the crowd gradually quieted, curious about what the future queen would do. "Wolves of the Northern Territories," Thalia said, her voice carrying despite her nervousness. "You've seen today what fear does to those who let it rule them." Alpha Vance was so afraid of a prophecy that he fulfilled it through his own actions. He hurt me, hurt others, and ultimately destroyed himself, all because he was too afraid to choose a different path. She turned slowly, making eye contact with wolves throughout the crowd. "I stand before you as an Omega, as someone who was rejected and exiled, who lived alone in the wilderness for 8 months, who doubted her own worth. But I also stand before you as a celestial Omega, blessed by the moon goddess with gifts that let me feel your emotions, understand your struggles, and connect with you in ways that transcend words." She felt the crowd's attention sharpen, felt their curiosity and cautious hope. "Alpha King Damon and I are going to build a kingdom together. Not one ruled by fear and force alone, but one where compassion and strength coexist. Where being kind doesn't make you weak. Where protecting the vulnerable is valued as much as conquest. Where every wolf, Omega to Alpha, matters and is valued." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Some of you may doubt that this is possible. Some may think I'm too soft to lead. But I've learned something these past weeks. Being soft-hearted doesn't mean being weak-willed. It means having the courage to remain compassionate even when it's difficult. To choose mercy when others would choose vengeance. To see the worth in every life, not just the powerful ones." She felt tears gathering, but didn't wipe them away. "I was rejected by an alpha who thought I wasn't strong enough. And he was right. I'm not strong in the way he valued. But I'm strong in other ways. In ways that matter. In ways that will help me serve you with my whole heart." The arena was silent, every wolf hanging on her words. "So if you'll have me as your queen, not to spite my gentleness, but because of it, I swear I will serve you faithfully. I will value every life. I will fight for those who can't fight for themselves. I will build a kingdom where strength and compassion aren't enemies, but allies." She took a deep breath. "That's the future I offer you. The future your Alpha King and I will build together. If you'll trust us with it." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Alpha Astrid stood, her voice ringing out. "I accept Lady Thalia as my queen." Alpha Leaf rose next. "The Western Territories accept her." One by one, the regional alphas stood and pledged their loyalty. And then the entire arena was on its feet, thousands of voices shouting their acceptance, their hope, their faith in the future Thalia had described. Damon pulled her into his arms, and Thalia felt the mate bond surge between them with such intensity it took her breath away. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "You won them over completely. Not with force or fear, but with honesty and hope." "We did it," Thalia corrected.
Together.
As the cheers continued to echo through the ancient arena, Thalia looked up at the darkening sky and thought about her grandmother, about the prophecy, about the long journey from rejected exile to accepted queen. She had risen, exactly as foretold. But not because destiny demanded it. Because she'd chosen it. Chosen to be brave, to be kind, to be herself even when it was terrifying. And that made all the difference. Chapter 12. Crown of Moonlight. 3 days after the Alpha gathering, Thalia stood once more in the chamber of the first wolves, but this time the room was filled with witnesses. Every regional Alpha, the entire Royal Council, Captain Morgan and the Eternal Guard, Lady Vesper and the palace staff, all crowded into the sacred space to witness what was about to unfold. The formal coronation. Thalia wore a gown that had taken a dozen seamstresses 2 days to complete, white silk that shimmered like moonlight, with silver embroidery depicting the story of her journey from exile to queen. Her hair had been woven with silver thread and tiny crystals that caught the light from the glowing obsidian walls. Beside her stood Damon, equally resplendent in black and silver, his own ceremonial attire marking him as the Alpha King who had ruled for 2 centuries and would now share that rule with his mate. Elder Finnick stood before them, holding the 2 ancient crowns on velvet pillows, the ones Thalia had touched days ago, the ones that had recognized her right to wear them. "We stand in the chamber of the first wolves," Finnick intoned, his voice resonating with power despite his age. "Where every ruler of the Northern Territories has been crowned for 3,000 years. Where the ancient spirits watch and judge those who would lead their descendants." He turned to face the assembled witnesses. "Today, we crown not just a king, for Alpha King Damon has worn his crown for 200 years, but a queen. A mate chosen not through political alliance or strategic necessity, but through the sacred bond ordained by the moon goddess herself." Finnick lifted the smaller crown, and the metal seemed to glow brighter in his hands. "Thalia Moonwhisper, you were born an Omega in a world that values Alphas. You were rejected by one who should have treasured you. You survived exile and isolation. You saved a stranger's life without knowing who he was. You negotiated peace where others would have chosen war. You won the loyalty of an entire kingdom through compassion and courage." He moved to stand directly before Thalia, holding the crown above her head. "Do you swear to rule with wisdom and compassion? To value every life, from the highest Alpha to the lowest Omega? To use your gifts in service of your people, even when it's difficult or painful?" "I swear it," Thalia said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Do you swear to stand beside Alpha King Damon as his equal partner, to support him and challenge him, to help him rule with both strength and mercy?" "I swear it," Thalia repeated. "Do you swear to protect the Northern Territories and all who dwell within them, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, to build a kingdom where compassion and strength coexist?" "I swear it," Thalia said for the 3rd time, feeling the weight of the oath settle into her bones. Finnick lowered the crown onto her head, and the moment the metal touched her, Thalia gasped. Power surged through her, ancient, vast, and overwhelming. She felt the presence of the first wolves, their spirits woven into the crown itself, accepting her, blessing her, welcoming her as one of their own. She felt the connection to every wolf in the kingdom, thousands of threads linking her to her people through invisible bonds of responsibility and care. And through it all, she felt Damon, their mate bond amplified by the crown's power until she could feel every nuance of his emotions, every thought, every breath. "Rise, Queen Thalia Nightshade," Finnick declared. "Ruler of the Northern Territories, Celestial Omega, and blessed by the moon goddess." The chamber erupted in cheers, and Thalia felt tears stream down her face as reality crashed over her. She was queen. Actually, truly queen. Damon pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply despite their audience, and Thalia felt his joy, his pride, his overwhelming love through the mate bond and the crown's amplification. "My queen," he murmured against her lips. "My heart. My everything." "My king," Thalia replied, smiling through her tears. "My mate. My home." The celebration that followed lasted 3 days and 3 nights. The entire Obsidian Palace was transformed into a festival ground, with food and music and dancing that seemed endless. Wolves from every corner of the kingdom came to pay their respects to their new queen, and Thalia greeted them all with the same warmth and genuine interest that had won over the court weeks ago. On the second day of celebration, Callista brought baby Sage to the throne room, the tiny pup now a week old and thriving despite her early arrival. "Your Majesty," Callista said, curtsying awkwardly while holding her daughter. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for us." "Please don't curtsy," Thalia said, moving from her throne to greet them properly. "You're holding a pup, you need both hands for that." She looked down at little Sage, who was awake and staring up at her with unfocused eyes. "She's grown so much already," Thalia said softly. "She's beautiful, Callista." "She is," Callista agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "And she'll grow up in a kingdom where being soft-hearted isn't seen as weakness, where omegas are valued, where a mother doesn't have to be a warrior to protect her child, because her queen will do it for her." Thalia felt tears prick at her eyes. "She'll always be safe here. You both will. You have my word." "I know," Callista said. "That's why I wanted to ask you something. Would you be Sage's godmother? Her guide and protector, if anything should happen to me?" The request caught Thalia off guard, and she felt the weight of it settle over her like a mantle. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm still learning how to be queen. I don't know if I'm the right choice." "You're the only choice," Callista interrupted gently. "You saved her life before she was even born. You showed me what real strength looks like. You're exactly who I want guiding my daughter if I can't." Thalia looked down at Sage again, at this tiny life that represented hope and new beginnings, and felt something settle into place. "It would be my honor," she said softly. "I accept." Later that evening, as the celebrations continued in the great hall below, Thalia and Damon escaped to the palace gardens, their private sanctuary away from the crowds and formality. "Tired?" Damon asked, pulling her close as they walked among the magically sustained plants. "Exhausted," Thalia admitted, "but happy, really, truly happy." They stopped beside a fountain carved in the shape of wolves, and Thalia looked up at the night sky, where stars glittered like diamonds against velvet darkness. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked. "How a random blizzard changed everything?" "It wasn't random," Damon replied. "The moon goddess sent that storm, Thalia. She saw what we both needed and brought us together in the only way that would work." "By nearly killing you?" Thalia asked with a small laugh. "By putting me in a position where I had to trust a stranger," Damon corrected. "Where I had to be vulnerable. Where I could hear you, really hear you, without the weight of my crown and my reputation getting in the way." He turned her to face him, his silver blue eyes intense in the moonlight. "For 200 years, I was alone, surrounded by wolves, constantly interacting with others, but fundamentally alone. Because no one saw me, they only saw the Alpha King, the power, the authority. But you saw me when I was just a dying wolf on your doorstep. You talked to me like I was worth knowing. You saved my life and asked for nothing in return." His hand cupped her face gently. "That's why I fell in love with you, Thalia. Not because of the mate bond, though that certainly helped, but because you saw the person beneath the crown. And you valued that person enough to risk your own safety to save him." Thalia felt tears gather in her eyes. "I fell in love with you too. With the wolf who listened to all my fears and insecurities and didn't judge me for them. With the male who gave me choices when he could have demanded obedience. With the king who values compassion as much as strength." They kissed under the stars, the mate bond singing between them, the weight of their crowns forgotten for this moment of pure connection. "What do you think our reign will be like?" Thalia asked when they finally broke apart. "What kind of legacy will we leave?" "That depends on what we choose to build," Damon replied thoughtfully. "But I think we have a chance to transform this kingdom into something unprecedented. A place where strength doesn't require cruelty. Where power is used to protect rather than dominate. Where every wolf, alpha to omega, is valued for who they are, not just what they can offer." "That sounds like the kingdom from the prophecy," Thalia said. The one that terrified Vance so much. Good, Damon said with satisfaction. Let it terrify those who rule through fear. Let it inspire those who lead through love. We're going to change everything, Thalia. Together. Over the following weeks, the changes began in earnest. Thalia established the Office of Compassionate Justice, a branch of government dedicated to ensuring that laws were applied with mercy as well as fairness. She created shelters for exiled wolves, offering them sanctuary and a chance to contribute to society rather than surviving as rogues. She started regular gatherings where common wolves could bring their concerns directly to the throne, ensuring that the voices of farmers and craftspeople were heard alongside nobles and warriors. And everywhere she went, Thalia used her empathic gift to truly understand her people, their hopes, their fears, their needs. She became known as the Queen who listens, and wolves traveled from distant territories just for the chance to speak with her. Damon, for his part, found himself falling more in love with his mate every day. He watched her transform the kingdom with quiet determination, watched her win over even the most skeptical nobles through genuine compassion and practical wisdom. She challenged him when she disagreed with his decisions, supported him when he needed strength, and loved him with a constancy that made his 2 centuries of loneliness seem like a distant nightmare. 6 months after the coronation, Thalia discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her like lightning, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She stood in their chambers, staring at the healer who had just confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks, unable to form words. "Your Majesty?" Healer Bronwyn asked gently. "Are you well? Should I summon the Alpha King?" "I'm pregnant," Thalia whispered, the reality of it finally sinking in. "I'm going to have a pup." "You are," Bronwyn confirmed with a warm smile. "A strong, healthy pup from what I can sense. Congratulations, Your Majesty. This is wonderful news." When Damon returned from a council meeting and found Thalia sitting in their chambers with tears streaming down her face, he was at her side in an instant. "What's wrong?" he demanded, fear spiking through the mate bond. "Are you hurt? Is someone—" "I'm pregnant," Thalia interrupted, looking up at him with wonder. "We're going to have a pup, Damon. We're going to be parents." The expression that crossed Damon's face was one Thalia would remember for the rest of her life. Pure, overwhelming joy mixed with awe and disbelief. "A pup," he breathed, dropping to his knees before her and placing his hands on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a pup. Are you happy?" Thalia asked, though she could feel his emotions clearly through the bond. "Happy." Damon laughed, the sound thick with emotion. "Thalia, I've lived for 200 years. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've witnessed countless miracles and tragedies. But this, you pregnant with our child, this is the most precious gift I've ever received." He kissed her stomach gently, then looked up at her with tears in his own eyes. "Our pup will grow up in the kingdom we're building together. They'll see their mother rule with compassion and strength. They'll learn that being soft-hearted is a gift, not a weakness. They'll know they're loved and valued, not for what they can offer, but for who they are. They'll be so lucky to have you as a father," Thalia said, running her fingers through his hair. "They'll be blessed to have you as a mother," Damon countered. "You're going to be extraordinary at this, Thalia. Just like you're extraordinary at everything else you do." The pregnancy became public knowledge within days, and the kingdom erupted in celebration. Baby gifts arrived from every territory, hand-carved cradles, embroidered blankets, protective amulets, and enough toys to fill an entire wing of the palace. Common wolves and nobles alike sent their congratulations, and Thalia felt the genuine joy of her people through her empathic gift. 7 months later, on a night when the full moon hung heavy and bright in the sky, Thalia went into labor. It was long and difficult, as first births often are, but Damon remained at her side through every moment, his presence through the mate bond a constant anchor. And when their son finally entered the world, crying lustily and already showing signs of his father's strength, Thalia felt her heart expand with a love so profound it seemed impossible to contain. "He's perfect," she whispered, cradling the tiny pup against her chest. Absolutely perfect. He is your eyes, Damon said in wonder, gently touching his son's downy hair. That same kindness, that same depth. And your strength, Thalia replied. I can feel it already.
He's going to be powerful, Damon.
But gentle too. The best of both of us. They named him Orion, after the constellation their grandmother used to say guided lost wolves home. Because in many ways, their son represented exactly that, coming home to love, to family, to belonging after lifetimes of searching. As Thalia sat in the royal chambers, holding her newborn son while her mate wrapped them both in his protective embrace, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From rejected exile to crowned queen. From believing she was too weak to realize she was exactly strong enough. From feeling utterly alone to being surrounded by love. What are you thinking? Damon asked softly, sensing her contemplative mood through their bond. I'm thinking about my grandmother, Thalia replied. About what she told me before she died, that my empathy would either be my downfall or my salvation, and the choice was mine to make. She looked down at Orion, at this perfect life they'd created together. I chose salvation. And it led me to you, to this kingdom, to our son. It led me exactly where I was always meant to be. Your grandmother would be proud, Damon said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Of the queen you've become. Of the mother you'll be. Of the legacy you're building. We're building, Thalia corrected gently. Always together. Outside their window, the moon continued its eternal path across the sky, and somewhere in the whisperwood surrounding the obsidian palace, wolves howled in celebration of their new prince. The sound carried across the northern territories, from pack to pack, territory to territory, a song of hope and new beginnings. The rejected Omega had become the beloved queen. The frozen wolf had become the devoted king. And together, they were building a kingdom where compassion and strength, gentleness and power, softness and courage could coexist in perfect harmony. Being different wasn't a weakness to overcome, but a gift to celebrate. Where love, true, genuine, mate-bond love, could change everything. The prophecy had promised that Thalia would rise to greatness and usher in an age of peace and prosperity. And as she sat in the royal chambers, surrounded by love, holding the future of the kingdom in her arms, Thalia finally understood that the prophecy hadn't made her great. She'd made herself great by choosing, again and again, to be exactly who she was, soft-hearted, empathic, and brave enough to remain kind in a world that often demanded cruelty. That was the true magic. That was the real strength. And that was the legacy she would pass on to her son, to her people, and to every generation that followed. The compassionate queen and the ancient king, ruling together, loving fiercely, and proving that sometimes the most powerful thing anyone can do is simply choose to remain kind. Even, especially, when the world says it's impossible. Chapter 13, Legacy of the Moon. 5 years after Orion's birth, the Obsidian Palace had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The austere halls that had once echoed with political intrigue now rang with children's laughter. The training grounds that had been solely dedicated to combat now included areas for teaching empathy and emotional awareness. And the throne room that had witnessed centuries of power struggles had become a place where common wolves felt comfortable bringing their concerns directly to their queen. Thalia stood in the royal gardens, watching as 5-year-old Orion played with Sage, now a bright and curious child herself. The two were inseparable, Orion with his father's silver-blue eyes and his mother's gentle heart, Sage with her mother's dark hair and a wisdom beyond her years.
Tag.
Sage squealed, touching Orion's shoulder before darting away. No fair, Orion called after her, laughing as he gave chase. You're faster than me. Then you need to be clever. Sage shot back, her voice carrying that matter-of-fact tone that always made Thalia smile. They're good for each other, Callista said, coming to stand beside Thalia. Over the years, she'd become one of Thalia's closest friends and most trusted advisors, her experience with Vance's regime providing valuable insight into wolves who ruled through fear. They are, Thalia agreed. Orion brings out Sage's playfulness. She brings out his strategic thinking. Future Alpha King and his genius advisor, Callista said with a laugh. Though I suspect Sage will be more than just an advisor. She's already showing signs of her own gifts. It was true. Sage had inherited something from both her parents. Vance's tactical mind and Callista's emotional intelligence combined into something uniquely powerful. The child could read situations with uncanny accuracy, and Thalia had started teaching her to use that gift ethically, the way her own grandmother had tried to teach her. Your Majesty, a messenger came running into the gardens, breathless and excited. News from the southern border. The delegation from the Crystal Peaks has arrived, and they're requesting an immediate audience. Thalia felt her pulse quicken. The Crystal Peaks were a collection of mountain packs that had been isolated from the Northern Territories for nearly a century, ever since a territorial dispute had ended in bloodshed and broken alliances. For months, Thalia and Damon had been working to rebuild that relationship, but progress had been painfully slow. Tell them I'll meet them in the diplomatic chambers in 1 hour, Thalia said, her mind already racing through protocol and strategy. And summon the Alpha King and the Royal Council. As the messenger ran off, Callista gave Thalia a knowing look. This is it, isn't it? The moment you've been working toward. I hope so, Thalia replied. If we can reunite with the Crystal Peaks, it opens the door to healing decades of division. But if this goes wrong... It won't, Callista said with confidence. You've already accomplished impossible things, Thalia. This is just one more. An hour later, Thalia and Damon sat side by side on their thrones as the delegation from the Crystal Peaks was shown in. They were led by an elderly female alpha named Phoebe, whose stern expression and battle scars spoke of a long life lived in conflict. Your Majesties, Phoebe said, her bow stiff and formal. Thank you for receiving us. The honor is ours, Alpha Phoebe, Damon replied with equal formality. The Northern Territories have long regretted the divide between our peoples. Phoebe's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprising. Clearly, she'd expected defensiveness or political posturing, not a straightforward admission of regret. The divide was mutual, she acknowledged. Both sides share responsibility for what happened a century ago. But that's not why we've come. She stepped forward, her weathered hands clasped before her. We've come because we've heard stories. Stories about a queen who rules with her heart as well as her head, who negotiates instead of conquering, who values compassion as much as strength. And we wanted to see for ourselves if these stories were true, or just propaganda designed to make your kingdom appear stronger than it is. Thalia felt a flutter of nervousness, but kept her expression calm. And what have you concluded, Alpha Phoebe? The elderly Alpha studied her for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She smiled. I've concluded that the stories don't do justice, Queen Thalia. The moment we crossed into your territory, we were treated with respect and courtesy, not suspicion and hostility. Common wolves we passed on the road spoke of you with genuine affection, not fear. And now, sitting before you, I can feel... She paused, searching for words. I can feel that you actually care about the answer to your question. You're not performing for an audience. You genuinely want to know what I think. Thalia felt heat rise in her cheeks. Of course I care. Your opinion, your people's well-being, matters to me. That, Phoebe said softly, is why we've come. The Crystal Peaks want to rejoin the Northern Territories. We want to end a century of isolation and division. We want to be part of what you're building here. The words hung in the air for a breathless moment. Then Damon stood, and Thalia followed, both moving down from the throne platform to meet Phoebe on equal ground. You honor us, Damon said, his voice thick with emotion. And we swear to honor your trust. The Crystal Peaks will be welcomed as full partners, not conquered territory. Your traditions, your autonomy, your voice in our councils, all will be respected and valued. I know, Phoebe replied, and there were tears in her ancient eyes. I've lived through 3 Alpha Kings, Your Majesty. I've seen rulers who cared only for power, who used wolves as tools rather than treating them as people. But you, both of you, you're different. You're what we've been waiting for. She turned to Thalia specifically. Especially you, Queen Thalia, a celestial Omega who rules not despite her gentle heart, but because of it. You're proof that strength and compassion aren't enemies. You're proof that change is possible. And the Crystal Peaks want to be part of that change. Thalia felt tears slip down her own cheeks as she embraced the elderly Alpha, feeling through her empathic gift the genuine hope and relief radiating from Phoebe. Welcome home, Thalia whispered. Welcome back to the family. The reunification of the Crystal Peaks was celebrated throughout the kingdom, but for Thalia, the most meaningful moment came weeks later, when Phoebe brought her granddaughter to meet the queen. The girl was young, maybe 12, with Phoebe's sharp eyes but a softness in her expression that reminded Thalia painfully of herself at that age. This is Wren, Phoebe introduced her. My granddaughter and heir. And like you, your majesty, she's a celestial Omega. Wren looked up at Thalia with a mixture of awe and desperate hope. Is it true? The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Is it true that you rule an entire kingdom? That being an Omega doesn't mean being weak. Thalia knelt so she was at eye level with Wren, seeing herself reflected in this child's uncertainty. It's absolutely true, she said gently. Being an Omega, being soft-hearted and empathic, isn't a weakness, Wren. It's a gift. A powerful gift that lets you understand people in ways others can't. And yes, you can rule with that gift. You can lead. You can change the world. But everyone says Omegas are supposed to be submissive, Wren protested, though hope gleamed in her eyes. That we're supposed to follow, not lead. Then everyone is wrong, Thalia replied firmly. I know, because I believed the same thing for a long time. But then I learned that submission and gentleness aren't the same as weakness. That you can be kind and still be strong. That you can feel deeply and still make hard decisions. That your empathy is actually your greatest strength, not your biggest liability. She placed a hand on Wren's shoulder. Don't let anyone tell you that your gentle heart makes you less than. It makes you more. It makes you extraordinary. And if you want, I'll teach you how to use your gifts the way my grandmother tried to teach me. I'll show you that celestial Omegas can change the world because we see it differently than everyone else. Wren's face crumpled, and she threw her arms around Thalia, sobbing with relief. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for showing me it's possible. That evening, Thalia told Damon about the encounter, and he pulled her close with a fierce pride that warmed her through the mate bond. Do you know what you've done? He asked. You haven't just changed our kingdom. You've changed what's possible for every Omega who hears your story. You've given them hope. Show them a different path. I just told her the truth, Thalia replied. That she's not broken or weak. That she's exactly who she's supposed to be. That's exactly why you're an extraordinary queen, Damon said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Because you see the truth that others miss. Because you value the wolves that others overlook. Because you lead with your heart and trust that your head will follow. As the years continued to pass, the changes in the Northern Territories became undeniable. Trade flourished as old enmities were healed. The population grew as exiled wolves returned, finding sanctuary in a kingdom that valued compassion. Innovation thrived as wolves who had previously been dismissed, Omegas, craftspeople, scholars, were given voice and authority. And at the center of it all stood Thalia and Damon, ruling together, loving fiercely, and proving every day that the strongest kingdoms weren't built on fear and domination, but on love and mutual respect. Orion grew into a thoughtful child who inherited his mother's empathy and his father's strength. He played with common pups and noble children alike, never understanding why anyone would think one was more valuable than another. He learned diplomacy from his mother and strategy from his father, but most importantly, he learned that true leadership meant serving others, not ruling over them. On Orion's 10th birthday, Thalia took him to visit her old cabin, the place where everything had changed. It is maintained now, preserved as a historical site, with a plaque outside that read, "Here, a rejected Omega saved a dying king and changed the fate of a kingdom. This is where you lived." Orion asked, looking around the small space with wide eyes. Before you were queen? This is where I hid, Thalia corrected gently. After I was rejected by an alpha who thought I wasn't good enough. I lived here alone for 8 months, thinking my life was over. But it wasn't over, Orion said. It was just the beginning. Exactly, Thalia agreed. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to our destiny. We just can't see it until we're on the other side. She knelt beside her son, looking into eyes that were so like Damon's but held her own gentleness. One day, you'll be king, Orion. And when that day comes, you'll face wolves who think that kindness is weakness, who believe that compassion and strength can't coexist. But I need you to remember this cabin and what it represents. What does it represent? Orion asked. It represents choosing to be yourself, even when the world says you should be someone else, Thalia replied. It represents staying kind even when you've been hurt. It represents opening your door to strangers, even when it's dangerous. It represents believing that love and compassion can change everything, because they can. Orion was quiet for a moment, then said something that made Thalia's heart swell with pride. When I'm king, I want to be just like you and Papa. Strong and gentle, powerful and kind. Someone who rules with their heart and their head together. Then you'll be an extraordinary king, Thalia said, pulling him close. Because that's exactly what the kingdom needs. 20 years after Thalia's coronation, the Northern Territories had been transformed so completely that wolves who remembered the old ways barely recognized it. The kingdom had expanded peacefully, incorporating 5 new regions that chose to join because they wanted to be part of what Thalia and Damon were building. Trade routes that had been closed for centuries were reopened.
Ancient feuds were resolved.
And everywhere, wolves lived with a security and prosperity that previous generations had never imagined possible. But perhaps most remarkably, the very definition of strength had changed. Warriors were still valued, but so were healers, teachers, mediators, and artists. Alphas were still respected, but so were omegas who led with empathy and wisdom. Power was still important, but compassion was considered equally essential. The compassionate queen had done more than rule a kingdom. She'd changed its entire worldview. On the 20th anniversary of her coronation, a ceremony was held in the great arena where Thalia had first addressed the assembled alphas. But this time, the crowd included not just nobility and warriors, but common wolves from every walk of life, farmers and craftspeople, scholars and artists, young and old, alpha and omega. Elder Finnick, now ancient but still sharp of mind, addressed the assembled masses. 20 years ago, we crowned a queen who had been rejected and exiled, who had been told she was too soft, too weak, too kind to lead. And many of us, myself included, wondered if she could truly rule a kingdom built on strength and dominance. He paused, letting his words sink in. We were fools. Because Queen Thalia didn't adapt to our kingdom, she transformed it. She showed us that strength without compassion is cruelty. That power without mercy is tyranny. That the strongest kingdoms aren't built on fear, but on love. He turned to where Thalia and Damon sat on their thrones, Orion standing proudly beside them. Your Majesties, you have given us 2 decades of peace and prosperity. You have healed ancient wounds and forged new alliances. You have built a kingdom where every wolf, regardless of rank or status, is valued and protected. You have shown us what's possible when leaders rule with both their heads and their hearts. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Thalia felt the genuine love and loyalty of her people washing over her through her empathic gift. Later, as the celebrations continued, Thalia found herself back in the palace gardens with Damon, just as they had been so many times over the years. We did it, she said softly, leaning against his chest. We actually built the kingdom we dreamed of. You built it, Damon corrected. I just helped. You were the one with the vision, the courage, the heart to make it real. We built it together, Thalia insisted, the old argument making them both smile. Always together. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Damon said, Do you ever think about that night? When I showed up at your cabin as a frozen wolf. All the time, Thalia admitted. I think about how scared I was. How sure I was that I was making a terrible mistake by opening that door. How certain I was that I'd never amount to anything. And now, Damon prompted. Now I understand that fear and courage aren't opposites, Thalia replied. Courage is choosing to act despite fear. And that night, opening my door to a stranger in the middle of a blizzard, that was the bravest thing I'd ever done, even if I didn't know it at the time. She turned to look at him, seeing silver in his dark hair now, the only sign of his centuries of life. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for valuing what I thought was weakness, for choosing me when anyone else would have been a safer, more strategic choice. There was never anyone else, Damon replied firmly. From the moment you dragged me into your cabin and started telling me your deepest secrets, there was only you. Only ever you. They kissed under the stars, just as they had countless times before, the mate bond as strong now as it had been when it first formed. And somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, not in mourning or warning, but in celebration.
In joy.
In hope for a future that honors both strength and compassion, power and mercy, tradition and change. The rejected Omega had become the legendary queen. The dying wolf had become the devoted king. And together, they had built a legacy that would endure for generations. A legacy that proved, beyond any doubt, that the softest hearts often harbor the strongest spirits. That being kind in a cruel world isn't weakness, it's the bravest, most revolutionary act possible. And that sometimes the greatest destiny begins with a simple choice to open your door to a stranger in need. Especially when every logical part of you says you shouldn't. Because that's where magic lives. In the space between fear and courage. In the moment when you choose compassion over self-preservation. In the act of seeing another suffering and deciding that their life matters more than your safety. That was Thalia's gift. That was her strength. That was her legacy. And it would echo through the ages, inspiring every Omega who felt too soft, every wolf who felt too weak, every heart that dared to remain kind despite the world's cruelty. The compassionate queen's reign had changed everything. And her story, the story of the exile who became queen, of the Omega who proved that gentleness is strength, of the female who chose love over fear, would be told around fires and in courts for thousands of years to come. A reminder that the most powerful magic of all is simply choosing to care. Even when, especially when, the world tells you not to.
The end.
Thank you for journeying with us through this tale, Moonlit Souls. Queen Thalia's story is complete. From rejected exile to beloved ruler, from isolated Omega to legendary queen. Her legacy lives on in every heart brave enough to choose compassion over cruelty, gentle enough to see strength in softness, and courageous enough to remain kind in a world that often demands otherwise. Until the next moonrise, may your heart stay wild and your spirits stay free.